All right, guys. Hey, we're back at the restaurant. But today I'm excited. I don't know if Gary is, but I am. So Gary's got a cool video behind him that we'll see shortly. But anyway, I'm excited. We have Russ Jones, who works out with me, works at the gym, mainly my wife, but he's my friend, and I'm lucky to know him. And that's why we have him on this podcast. But he's got a new book coming out, which is what I've got pictured here on the screen. And those for those are they're just listening on the podcast version. It's called Appalachian Bigfoot. I'm from Ohio, so I don't even know really how to say if it's Appalachian or I don't know, but it's Appalachian Bigfoot. Before that, in you had a good book also, which was called Tracking the Stone Man, which I saw today. Well, actually, I saw probably before. You're making some addendums to that, is that correct? Or like a version 2?
Yeah, that's right. It's going to have a second edition later this year. The Appalachian Bigfoot, which, remember, I'm from Ohio too, so I may have trouble with that word too.
Yes,
although I've been here for a while. But it's done well. It's been number 1 on Amazon for 10 weeks now, and so the publisher signed me to a contract to do a second edition of the Stone Man, which was a bestseller like 7 years ago or something like that, which is cool because, after 7 years, things are different. Things have changed. Some of my, it's getting outdated.
Yeah, but that's cool. So even this book, though, is what, 10 weeks in a row? Is that right?
10 weeks. I mean, it's wild because, you put something out. I started it before COVID, worked on it through COVID, like the first year. Then I moved and I didn't have a good place to write. So I set it aside for several months. And then I worked a couple hours a day on it for, 4 or 5 months, and I was done. But when you put it out, you're just never sure how the public's going to perceive it, or, it's a controversial topic, and, you spell out some of your beliefs and you're not sure whether people, whether they're going to believe what you're saying. Maybe they'll disagree with what you're saying or whatever it happens to be.
Have you written other books, or is this the only genre that you've written?
I never even planned on doing this, but one of my patients came in it's probably like 8 or 9 years ago now. And he's like, do you know this guy? And he handed me this book, and it was called like Bigfoot in West Virginia or something. I don't even remember what it was. And I looked, and it was this college professor, and he had like an opening chapter and a closing chapter, but the whole rest of his book was just reports that I had published, and he just had them verbatim in there. And I thought, I probably should do my own thing. I had interviewed probably 500 people by then. And so that's when I did the first book and went through that process. And, you had to find a publisher and all this and whatnot. And so now it was a lot easier this time, the second time around. But like I said, it's still, you don't know how it's going to be. It's humbling that people want to buy it. It's humbling that, people will spend their time. Everybody's so busy, and, they're going to spend 6 or 7 hours reading something about Bigfoot. Who would think?
Yeah.
So what I was going to say, so I'm kind of curious what got you started into the Bigfoot realm. And you said whereabouts in Ohio are you from?
I'm from Lancaster, Ohio, which is in the southeast part of the state, about 30 minutes south of Columbus.
Yeah, well, okay. So the Hocking Hills, and I'm from Athens area. So
okay.
I lived in Athens pretty much my whole life until I moved to North Carolina about 9 months ago. But
so you'll hear me talk about Athens. That's where my farm is. And so I'm in Athens usually every other weekend, and then every month or so I'm there for a full week.
Okay, and so now I also know that they had the Bigfoot. I'm going to call it the Bigfoot Convention, but it was at Burr Oak State Park, which is right outside of Gloucester, Ohio, which is where I live. And I think that Bobcat Goldthwait was there, did some sort of thing, and he had a whole documentary thing that he shot there.
So surprisingly, Bigfoot is a huge deal, and there's probably, I'd say maybe 100 seminars, conventions, whatever you want to call them, across the country. The biggest one in the country is the Ohio Bigfoot Conference, and that's at Salt Fork State Park. But you'll see other ones like the one that's in Hocking Hills. They have their own at Camp Odiaqua that is strictly for raising money for Big Brother, Big Sister in Columbus. I've spoke there a couple times. The one that was in the one you're talking about in Burr Oak was kind of a trial deal. You know, there's these little ones popping up, especially Ohio's a big deal. I mean, you have the #1 state for Bigfoot sightings is Washington, then Oregon, then California, and number 4 is Ohio. Which, you
Well,
know,
a lot of people don't know this, but like the biggest national forest, I think now I'm not positive, but I think the biggest national forest in the United States is Wayne National Forest, which is in Southeast Ohio, covers almost all of Southeast Ohio. It starts clear up by Steubenville, and that's that Steubenville area, a little bit south of that, but it comes clear down. Basically it follows the Ohio River and it takes the bottom part of the state.
yeah, it's the Waynes, a big national forest is divided into 3 sections. I spend most of my time in Selesky, which you know because you're from Athens. And so my farm is about 15 minutes from Selesky. Stroud's Run, which is in Athens, I go to sometimes. And of course, I used to be from maybe Otter Creek, the high mountains, Canaan Valley, that area, Dolly Sods, all the way down to about where I grew up. Clear Creek was about the farthest north that I went, which is it's part of the Columbus Metro Park system. It's a preserve of 5,000 acres, and it's in Southeast Ohio as well. But now I'm trying to get where I was just everywhere all the time. And so I may get up and not see patients that day, and I'm like, I'm in the New River Gorge for the whole day or wherever it happened to be. But now I'm trying to concentrate and spend all my energy on just, a certain places. But what you had asked, that I guess I kind of skipped because that's, who knows, I get off these tangents here, but
It was my fault. It was my fault. I took us there. I'm sorry.
I grew up in a family of outdoorsmen. Some people say they like to hunt, but with my family, it was a lifestyle. I can remember when I would be a little boy, I shot my first rabbit when I was 6 because it was Thanksgiving Day. And after we ate lunch, all the men would go rabbit hunting, and we had rabbit dogs, we had coon dogs, we ginseng hunt, we all deer hunted. People would come from all over to buy our dogs. They would come over to see how many deer were hanging and how the largest bucks were, and this is in the 70s. And I was taking a gentleman that was in the Army out on New Year's Day rabbit hunting. And New Year's Eve, we'd gotten about 4 inches of snow. New Year's Day was beautiful and sunny, but cold in the 20s. And I came along this hillside, and there was a cave there. And of course, I knew the cave was there, but you really couldn't see it very well. But my dogs had been in there before, and I found bare-footed human footprints. I didn't know anything about Bigfoot at that time. And that guy and I looked at those prints for a long time, and they came from that cave. And so I believe that whatever it was had weathered that storm in that cave, and it was still there when it heard me coming with my dogs, and it left. They were fresh right in front of us, but they weren't big feet. They were about a normal human male size. Then later that year, I was at a beaver dam fishing, which is about a mile back in the wilderness. No one knew about it but my family because, our dogs had been back there. And I was standing there on a dam fishing with my uncle. We weren't talking. We were both wearing pistols because there was a lot of snakes there. And I heard something coming down on the other side of the dam, about 40 yards from me in the brush. And I couldn't see very clearly over there, but I glanced and I saw my uncle was looking too. And I assumed that it was probably a deer coming or something. But for about 20 seconds, the brush shook and I heard very monkey-like screaming over there. And, I looked at my uncle and I'm like, what do you think it is? And he's like, just look for a tree you can get to. And, because I had to come across some water to get to us. But after about 20 seconds, it quit and we just didn't hear anything. And then ironically, because we were raised in the woods, we just kept fishing because, we were always raised, there's just not anything in the woods that's not more afraid of you than it. So, we just stayed there and fished. And later that year, Leonard Nimoy had a show called In Search Of. And one of the episodes on In Search Of was In Search of Bigfoot. I saw it and I got suspicious. And then 2 more times before I had left for college, I had found footprints. And I was always interested in it. I read all the books. I kept up with everything that was going. I watched all the TV shows. And about 15 years ago, I saw that this anthropologist named Jeff Meldrum, which is on TV a lot, and Dr. Meldrum was speaking at that Ohio conference, which at that point, was maybe a few hundred people. Now, in the course of a weekend, it's 5,000 to 6,000 people. And they have like 3 or 4 speakers that are supposed to be experts on the subject. I've spoken there several times myself, but I went just to listen to what he had to say, because Salt Fork from Charleston's like an hour and 45 minutes, 2 hours or something. And it was funny because I listened to him speak, and I was driving home, and one of my friends called, and he's like, well, what did you think? And I was like, well, there's some pretty weird people there. And he's like, well, I don't want to be mean, but it's a Bigfoot thing. And I was like, yeah, I get it. So I saw that when you Google Bigfoot, BFRO comes up, which stands for Bigfoot Field Research Organization. And it's about 1 million hits a month. It's the biggest research organization on Bigfoot. They catalog all the sightings across North America. And I saw that they were having this expedition that you could go on, and you had to sign a non-disclosure form. You had to be interviewed. You had to pay like $500. And I thought, it was only 10 in the country going on. One was in Ohio. And I thought, I'm just going to go. And if they're weird, I'll leave. And I went, and at that time, Matt Moneymaker from the TV show Finding Bigfoot, which is a lawyer that started that group, was there. And Matt and I just hit it off. And after that time, I started doing all the reports for the group in the state of Ohio and West Virginia. Now we have more people. And like I said, it's crazy how much it's changed in terms of just, we have about 100 investigators in North America, which includes Canada. And they're people that are trained to recognize whether people are telling the truth or not the truth. If it's a worthy report, they'll go in person and investigate and follow up with phone calls. They are doctors, lawyers, rangers, firemen, policemen, a wide variety of professionals that are doing it. And in the database, which started around early 2000s, there's around 65,000 reports. But of course, probably half of them are misidentifications. Once the TV show got started, Finding Bigfoot, it became really popular, had a couple million viewers. They did 10 seasons of it. Well, prior to that show, most people didn't even know that Bigfoot had sounds associated with it. So as soon as they found that out, then you would get all these reports like, I've been in the woods my whole life, and I know all the animal sounds, but I had this thing happen to me and I can't explain it, and that type of thing. And I looked at 2 of those this morning that, had just came in. So I've been active with it since then.
Well, yeah, and you covered a lot of stuff there that I actually want to ask you questions about. So that's perfect, because I don't have to ask the questions now. So it's even better. But although it ruined all that beautiful research that I did, because I thought, man, I'm going to sound really cool and ask these questions. But first and foremost, like I was thinking when we started this, I want to, because most people have a story like how you got into this, which you covered. That side, your first Bigfoot thing was in 1977. Is that correct? When he came out of that cave and saw those footprints?
Yeah, it was. It's interesting. I was pretty sure that there was something, but I wasn't sure. And when I started doing the reports, the very first one I got was a state policeman in Raleigh County here in West Virginia. And I talked to him, and then I went down there, and him and his wife like to ride a 4-wheeler, and he's interested in hunting ginseng. So it was warm weather, and they were just out putting around looking for places that ginseng, you would pick, which in West Virginia, Appalachia, it's in the fall. And so they were riding on a right of way, and they took a little cut off, and he's putting along looking. And then he asked me, he said, have you ever seen one? And I said, no. And he said, think sheet of plywood. He's like, it's so large, you can't imagine. And people disappear in the woods all the time. And I'm not saying they do it, but he's like, you just can't imagine. And he said, I glanced at it and I thought it was a fire burned stump. And he said, but then I looked again and I just saw it. And he said, I was only 30 feet from it and I had a gun on, but it was enormous. And he said, I just started hitting reverse in my 4-wheeler. And my wife said, what are you doing? And he said, look, 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 look. And she just started screaming, oh my God, no, oh my God, no. And the story went on. It was interesting. They moved, she had to get counseling. They moved from the country into the city. And he told me that even still, I haven't talked to him maybe in a year, but for a long time after that, if she heard a noise in her neighborhood, she was afraid that Bigfoot was in their neighborhood. And I took him out there at night with another state policeman, and he just chain smoked and sobbed. They were both holding a gun out. And I thought, you know, he thinks he saw something. I mean, you know, this obviously is not, you know, faking this. And then in the meantime, I mean, I have interviewed policemen, deputies, park rangers, loggers, teachers, mayors, chief of police, all ranges of life. And that's one of the things that's interesting about Bigfoot, the witnesses, is there's not a type of witness, because the number one type of sighting is a road crossing. But
Yeah.
Bigfoot witnesses are a geographic. They live in an area where something like that exists, and that's the only thing largely that they have in common most of the time.
Well, yeah. So that's and there's a lot to kind of unpack there. First of all, I want to say, you know, I was reading your book too, and that was one of the things you said, why I believe, and it's all the people that you talk to. And it's when you have a guy sobbing, chain smoking, clearly something happened, right? Like, it doesn't matter how you unpack that. I guess first, he thinks he saw something, right? So for the people that aren't believers, like, let's put it that way, right? Like, he definitely saw something. So let's say that it doesn't have to be Bigfoot. He saw something. So somebody can still say, well, it was this, it was that, whatever. That's, you know what I mean? Like, that's the difference, right? Because I think a lot of, it's the same thing with UFOs a lot, you know, is that well, it's the same thing with everything in West Virginia. Let's put it that way. I've been putting some memes, and it's like every time there's a wreck or a natural disaster, who do they interview? Is like the most redneck, toothless people that clearly didn't dress up for TV. You know what I'm saying?
Yeah.
I almost think, because that's what the memes are about. Like, it's like, are they looking for these people? You know, the news looking for these people or what? But that's not exactly, and just like you said, that's not exactly who's seeing all these things. I think that's what people think, right? Because it's easy to dismiss. It's like, all right, every time I saw like a UFO video or a Bigfoot video, it's some like douchebag or redneck, you know, they're idiots, they're looking for attention, but that's not reality. Like, that's because it's good TV, or that's who they want to put on TV. But like example, like yourself, for example, right? You're a doctor, you're a chiropractor.
I'm a certified master naturalist.
Well, yeah, and actually, I'm glad since you brought that up, because that was going to be one of my first questions. I want to clarify that. So can you cut this story off for a second, and just tell me what a certified naturalist is, master naturalist is?
So there's a lot of states that have naturalist programs or master naturalist programs, but some of them are very good and some of them are not very good. And in the past, West Virginia has been an exceptional program. So what essentially it is they have a college professor teach a subject. And in West Virginia, I've taken about 40 classes now. You take essentially every other Friday, there's a lecture on a subject. It may be ferns, it may be snakes, it may be birds, trees, shrubs, you know, almost anything that you can imagine, wildflowers, mammals, salamanders, frogs, toads. And there's a 3-hour lecture on that class. And then the next day you meet somewhere in a park that has whatever it is that you're looking for. So if it's a snake class, you're going out looking for snakes. And so you have to accomplish all those classes in a 1-year period of time. And then, like I said, there's about 40 classes and there's always offering more classes than that. So once you get past that, and you've done all that, then you're a certified master naturalist. But there's some states like Ohio has, you know, I don't know, 6 or 7 classes or something. And so they don't call them certified master naturalists. They call them like naturalist helpers, or I forget the exact name, but, you know, it's just something else when you're a woodsman or interested in it. It's been in your whole life. And I think that's what I found with the Bigfoot community in general, is about half the people were outdoorsmen and woodsmen like that something had happened to you in the woods that you couldn't explain, and it's ate at you. And you know, you you know what normal is, and you know what normal is not. For instance, here a while back, I was in Ohio and I'm on some park road, and it's narrow road, and I see his truck coming. So we're kind of both getting off to let each other pass. When it gets up to me, I see it's a U.S. Forest Service vehicle. And so we're talking, and I'm like, what are you doing back here? And he said Ohio State was doing a rattlesnake survey. It's an endangered species in Ohio, and they found 2 dens. And so he was checking on those. And he said, what do you do? And I said, I'm a chiropractor. And he said, are you that chiropractor that does the Bigfoot stuff? And I'm like, that's me. Because, a lot of the parks, they know I'm in there a lot. And so, he slammed his truck in park, and he said, let me tell you. And he said, he's a PhD, a doctor, he's an ecologist. And he said, I've been in this park 17 years, and 7 times, I think is the number he gave me, 7 or 8 times, he had heard the wood knocking, which is one of the sounds that they reportedly make. And he said, when you're in the woods a lot, you just know when there's a sound that's not a natural sound, that's not something, that you would expect to hear. And it was interesting. We were talking about bones. There's one lecture I give that's an hour long just on where are the bones. And he was telling me, we have 500,000 deer in Ohio. And he's like, we just don't find the deer that we should that are dead, which is true when you go to think about it. Is, we see deer bones commonly, but, when there's 500,000 of them, you'd think you should see them a lot.
Yeah. No, that's a good point. Everything you're bringing up is things I want to ask you. So I'm going to have to take my time here and kind of stay focused. And Gary, you're just going to be along for the ride, my man.
Well, I was actually going to say it makes sense that because you said half of the reports come from outdoorsmen, right? It would make sense that they're most likely going to be the people who would see something or hear something. And honestly, like outdoorsmen seem to be, to me, the most credible witnesses because they've been out there. They've seen the stuff. They know what's out in the woods. I grew up, I don't know how it was for you, but I remember being 12 years old and I would come home, drop my books, grab the 410, and I was out hunting squirrels. Yeah. So, and I've had
just to mention though, not to cut you off again, but that's about the age that Russ was when he first found those footprints. It was about 11 or 12, right? So
right.
It's exactly your story.
Go ahead,
I was just gonna say, I've not had any experiences out there that would lead me to believe that I've seen Bigfoot, but I definitely had experiences in the woods where it didn't seem natural, natural in the sense that something that I'd seen before. I heard noises that I hadn't heard before, like a low whooping noise, and maybe that's what it was. I don't know. But it could also been the wind hitting something right and making a whooping noise or whatever. Right. I'm not discrediting anybody or saying anything like that. But for me, it just seems that somebody who's lived their life in the woods would be the most credible source for something that, hey, this doesn't sound right.
And they do reportedly make whooping sounds.
Yeah, well, and that's the reason I said that, because I'm not unlike Butch. I've seen a lot of Bigfoot stuff. I've heard a lot about. I haven't read your book. I need to, but I haven't read your book. But I am not dismissing the idea that Bigfoot is a thing. I just want more proof,
Sure.
So,
yeah.
So today I'm kind of playing the skeptic.
That's all right.
Perfect. No, it's perfect. That's what we want, right? We want the guy that's the expert, which is Russ, and then me, the believer, and that's we need somebody to always play devil's advocate to have a good conversation, quite frankly, right?
Yeah.
And this is which is the point of your books. You talk about all these things, and it's funny because every statement brings up something I want to ask. But let me go ahead and just take what Gary just said. Like, so there's some things I wanted to ask you later, but I'll just go ahead and say it now. The most common things with Bigfoot, if you're in the woods, right? The noises, which is the whooping thing, which sometimes, like when I have watched Finding Bigfoot, sometimes I'm like, are you sure? Like if there was a Bigfoot, are you sure that that's not scaring them off when like Bubba gets on there and is like, whoa, like whatever, what I mean? I'm like, you sure? Like, because if you're wrong about this, you're just wasting a bunch of time, right? Like you're doing the Bigfoot call. And then of course there's the wood knocking, which, usually people are slamming some kind of a hard stick against the tree. And then maybe third, which they're not really doing, but we had a guest on, which Russ, which is Lisa Roberts. She actually has somewhat of a Bigfoot thing. I don't know if you ever talked to her. She always says she's going to mention it to you because I tell her to. But she, and Gary might remember this. This was on the one with her friend, but she said her and her husband are out there and somebody was throwing rocks at them, right? So that's the other thing, is like kind of throwing rocks. I think those are the three that I know. There might be more than that, but
Yeah.
what's your thoughts on all three of those? Because you do address them in the book, that the Stone Man book that
Yeah.
you first read.
So the Stone Man, when I wrote that was just when I believed that if someone didn't try to blow away with all this stuff and you just laid out in an orderly manner the best evidence that was present, that a reasonable person could read the book and at the end may say, maybe, maybe. And then when I got to the Appalachian Bigfoot, it's covering, of course, more states because it's all of Appalachia, but it's taking a deeper dive into some of the things that I've went, like the wood knocks. When you see finding Bigfoot and they're knocking in the trees and the woods and stuff, in reality, when all of us are in the woods, we don't do that. I get, like today, there was some lady who was sending me messages from the southern part of the state because something had happened. And, and she was sending me pictures of this and that or whatever. And these people talk about these trees being bent in different ways and all this other stuff. But the reality is that I think that if people are really interested and they want to see what somebody that's a real Bigfooter would do, Les Stroud, Survivor Man.
Yeah, he's awesome.
Has a series of episodes called Bigfoot, and he goes into the woods and tries to evoke different things. And he's doing things like that I would do. I don't make noises when I'm in the woods. I'm just there, just like I'm a hunter or I'm hiking, except for I'm not on trail, unless it's briery and it's summer and you just have to be on trail. And I'm visiting, I have 40 game cameras. And so they're up all over the place. Aside from 40 game cameras, I leave in rock overhangs. I may leave little toys. I may leave all these things like different colored rocks or marbles or whatever, just trying to entice a primate. I have peanut butter in the woods, Nutella, things like that. I've had a couple interesting things happen, but I probably have 100 things of peanut butter out there and nothing really ever happens to it. But it was interesting. Last year, I had lost a camera, and close to the camera, I had a peanut butter out. Sometimes I will put peanut butter out, it's duct taped to a tree. Some of the people in the past have said that, they may interact with red or with yellow lids, which, to me, maybe that's a color thing, a trichromatic thing that maybe they're interested in, colors that would be similar to fruits that we would see, in other places. And so that's the type of things that I put out there. Well, my peanut butter was gone. And so, you think about it, you don't know, whatever it happens to be. And then about maybe a few months later, I lose another camera. It's probably 3/4 of a mile cross country. So I'm in the woods, coming up to this, random hollow, and I'm going up through. Well, I come up to where I lost my camera, and at the foot of the tree is the lid of the peanut butter that I lost 3/4 of a mile away.
Wow.
And then just a couple months after that, there's a friend of mine in Ohio that's a medical doctor named Dr. Kenny Brown. Kenny's a young, bright woodsman, always in the woods. And Kenny was in a part of Selesky, which Gary knows, of course, that I commonly go to. It's the largest section of woods in Ohio with no trails. And Kenny was in there, and he sent me a picture, and it was a picture of a peanut butter. And he said, "Is this one of your peanut butters?" I'm like, "Yeah." But it was a peanut butter that I had 3 miles off trail. Wow. And something or someone, you can't prove anything. For all I know, as a person, a hunter took it off, and there may be a hunter that would walk 4 miles off trail to get out the way that Kenny was. But there's just interesting things that appeal to you. And aside from that, I don't want to set aside the witnessing too. Like not long ago, I had a nurse that was at the Summersville Hospital. She drives through Cranberry Wilderness area on her way to work. She's come over what's the name of the mountain? It's Kennison Mountain. It's like toward Falls and Hills. And so she's kind of coasting, and she says, she sees this bear there. It's daylight, and she sees this bear kind of getting up the hill. And she said, then it slips down, and she said, then it's put up its hand and grabbed a tree and turned and looked at her. And she's like, it's not a bear. I saw it. It's close. So it was a good report. She was bright, and, I liked it. So, I kept it away with, all my reports. And then not long after that, I get a report from a medical doctor, and him and his wife, same hill, same place, going down. He sees a Bigfoot cross the road in front of him. He tells his wife, what's that guy doing in a monkey suit? And he gets down there where it was. He stopped and he looked around and he looked at his wife and he said, we just saw Bigfoot. And so, I take that report. So then it's eating me up because, there are 2 sightings, same place. I spent a lot of time up there and a lot of cameras that were up there, but, nothing ever happened to it. But I can tell you that about, maybe 3 or 4 times a year, you'll just get an exceptional witness, someone that will say, you can't tell anybody about this. I'm a mayor, or I'm the police chief, or I'm whoever I am, just so you know who I am, and I'm not faking this. But I legitimately saw this, and it was very clear. I had a daytime sighting of this. And it's been, I've taken 3 that were hunters in West Virginia that had clear daytime sightings where they could have shot it. And, but they didn't. It catches you off guard. You don't go in the woods thinking, I'm going to run into Bigfoot today. Yeah. And, so there's, they're not expecting it.
The other thing too is, like, as a hunter, if I seen something that looked like Bigfoot, I would have the fear of trying to shoot something like that, not knowing. And this is, once again, me coming from it as kind of like the skeptical point of view, but not knowing whether or not it is a guy in a suit. How do I know that I'm shooting at an actual animal? I know what a bear looks like. I know what a deer looks like. If I see something that is human shape and standing upright on 2 legs, I would be afraid to shoot it just because I don't know if it's somebody screwing around with me.
There's been a history of sightings or of people shooting it and, not thinking it looked a little too human. And, and there was 2 students that were from Ohio University, and they're out west. I want to say it was Idaho. They thought that they were shooting at an elk, and it was apparently a Bigfoot that was bent over doing grubbing and, doing something in the ground. And they had shot it, and it kind of hit the spinal cord and killed it. And so they went and looked at it. It looked too human. They were terrified. They buried it, and they made a vow that they would never mention it again. And here, several years ago, one of the guys died, and the other one came public and went out there and took DNR out and just couldn't find the spot that he had it. But frankly, I put cameras out, and a lot of times I get back to them, it's over a year. And if there's leaves on or not leaves on, it can be a little hard to find my cameras sometimes. So I can imagine, how much the ground would change over a period of decades when you're trying to find a spot. So it's pretty common to have things happen like that. Historically, there's around 40 cases of supposedly where a Bigfoot was shot or hit with a car, or, something like that happened. But, we're talking about something rare if they exist.
Yeah. And I wouldn't say it's famous, but it's on a lot of the Bigfoot shows where a guy says that he killed one. My description is not going to be great, but it's a similar story where he says he killed one, then actually saw it had blood on his shoe and all this stuff, but then he left, and then they couldn't find the body. So maybe, like, if it was a true sighting, a true story, that maybe other Bigfoots could have carried it off, or whoever. But but it's one of the rare stories where somebody said they did, and it was like, but I don't, and I'm not a hunter, right? I'm from Ohio, Cleveland, Ohio. So that's important because there's a distinction. It's like when I look at Ohio, I think of Cleveland or Columbus or Cincinnati, like these cities. And it's funny because a lot of times people go through Ohio and they're like, dude, it's more country than West Virginia. Like, all the coal fields and stuff. And I'm like, no, it's not, and I argue with them. And what I know of is Cleveland, right? So it's we have the metro parks, a little bit of woods, but not very much, but yeah, so the point I guess I was saying is that, yeah, like I can imagine, just as a guy that doesn't hunt, and I have went hunting once, and well, I'll preface this story. I'll just say a hunting story that I have. Like when I moved here from Cleveland, I took I got, I got kicked out of high school in Cleveland, and because I was a bad city kid. So I thought, well, I should go back at least a semester and make sure I can go to school before I go to college, right? And so that's what I did. And I went to a little school called Gilmer County in Glenville, West Virginia, where the college is at. But anyway, I was like, what do you do for fun? And everybody's like, we hunt and fish. And I'm like, yeah, well, that's not me. That's not really going to work right here. Ride a four-wheeler. I was like, I don't even know what that stuff is. So it's not really going to work. But my point is, then the kids that I hung out with, they all hunted. And I was like, well, let me give this a shot. Even though I kind of knew that it wasn't going to be for me. I have nothing against hunters whatsoever. Actually, the more and more that I listen to people that hunt, specifically the Joe Rogan podcast, I actually admire it. Never have anything against it, but I'm just not that guy. So anyway, they took me hunting. It's kind of a funny story. Like probably the first 20, 40 yards were in the woods. Here's like 2 deer. And they're like, man, shoot that thing. So I was like, all right. And then it was time, and I just didn't have the balls to do it. So I shot over the deer so that it would run away. And they're like, oh man, that sucks, you missed, man. And I was like, yeah, that's a bummer, like whatever. So then we walk another, I'm like, good. I saved. That was a close call. Like, good for me. I saved it. Thing. So we walk like another 50 yards and here the same freaking deer right there. They didn't really run far. They're probably some dumb deer. So like, oh, shoot it again, man. It's there. It's like right in front of you. Shoot it, And so I think this time they kind of saw what I was doing. So I shot again, trying to get it to run off. And they're like, dude, fuck you, man. Like you missing that thing on purpose. Like you're not even trying. And I was like, well, yeah, like I am. I thought I was ready. I want to know what it's about. And I'm not. I didn't. I was like, that's the same, like when I'm in Ohio, like that's the same creature I look at and say, man, that's pretty. I'd like to pet it or feed it, or I'm not looking at it like I want to kill it and eat it. It just, I wasn't ready for it. Right. And I guess so. My point is for like, and that's maybe a little different for somebody that's in the woods, but I wouldn't, like if I saw like a Bigfoot or a bear or something that I wasn't ready to hunt, I don't know if I'd be ready to shoot it. So I know like as like a lay person, a normal person, 2 questions come in, like, why do you not shoot it? And why do you not take a picture? Right.
Mm-hmm.
And these are common questions, right? I'm sure that everybody asks you.
Sure.
It's not that easy, right? Because there's a lot. Same thing goes for a deer. How many people don't take a picture of the deer that they saw? And for that same thing, those same friends would tell me they saw these 16-point, bucks. When I'm making numbers up, because you would know more than me. That's probably bullshit. Like 6-point buck or something, right? Like,
right.
But and I'm like, well, do you have a picture of it? No, man, it moved too fast, right? That's just a deer we see every day.
Yeah.
Right. So it is like for people that don't go in the woods, like that's not what's going, like you're not going to have all this stuff ready. And if you, for the story that I'm saying, and I know you guys don't probably know what I'm saying because I watch a bunch of weird shows, but like most people, if you think it's a human or you think it's a guy in a monkey suit, and I want to preface this also, I'm sorry, I'm gonna keep getting off track. I used to have this giant joke forever and this is when I lived in Cleveland. I was like, because I loved Bigfoot shows and I love the Patterson Gimlin footage and all that stuff. I was like, when I moved to West Virginia, I'm going to dress up like Bigfoot and I'm going to get 2 kids to walk with me and I'm going to be a family and we're going to walk across the road and freak people off. That was like my main comedy skit that I was going to do forever. Luckily, I didn't do it because I moved to West Virginia and I realized everybody had a gun. And that if I did do that, I would probably die. And whatever 2 little people I had with me would probably die as well if they were kids or like little, you know what I'm saying? Like it didn't quite work out. Right. But my point is like, it's not that easy, right? Like things are gonna, like, I can't imagine, like, I guess a better story is these are kind of being funny, but like how many people, I don't know if you know people that deer hunt, but they talk about buck fever. You see a buck and then you start shaking, right? And half the time they miss it because they're so excited. So now we have the same people talking about a Bigfoot that this mythical great, thing that may or may not exist and we don't know. And then you're going to talk about shooting it when we're talking about like a guy that deer hunts can't shoot a buck. Like, come on, man. Like, I mean, you know what I'm saying, right? It's a weird scenario, right?
It's hard. You think about, for instance, a bear. We have 25,000 bears in West Virginia. Ohio has less than 100 resident bears. And So I see bears about 5 times a year, but get a picture of a bear that's not in a dump or not on a road. And it's rare that you would ever have time to get your phone out to do it. Now I have a GoPro, one of my hiking stick. And I did that, Gary, because I had 2 years ago now, I guess it would be, a sighting at Stroud's Run, where you grew up. And so I was there because I keep this calendar, and my calendar has all the reports, all the things that people have told me, all the noises, and all the data that's from my game cameras. So like, I have those game cameras everywhere, but the reality is there's a couple pictures that are probably legitimate across the country, but now we're finding out the game cameras, even the expensive ones like that I use, they're around $500 a piece. They still have a noise, and they're about 30 decibels, and animals can hear them, children can hear them. And even though they're hidden, and even though they're camouflaged, and even though they don't flash, they're black, they have a filter blocking that thing. As a night, you still see the animals looking at your camera. And so, you just don't have commonly, something that you're going to be able to see it or not, because if you have 20,000, what we say, 25,000 bears that are in West Virginia, in West Virginia, I estimate that there's 150 to 225 Bigfoot. So it sounds like a big number, but when you compare it to the bears and ask people how often they're seeing them, you're just not seeing them. And the same way with the bones, if you figure that a Bigfoot would live about the same lifespan as the other great apes, like the orangutans, the mountain gorillas, and things like that, it would live around 50 years, and the attrition rate would be around 5% a year. So that means that in West Virginia, you would have, like, in a year, 11 or 12 animals that would be dead for you to find. But we don't find dead bobcats. We don't find predator bones. We don't find coyote bones commonly, anything like that. DNR told me that they'd never found a bear bones, with the exception of, one that's been hit or whatever it happens to be. So it's not likely that, someone's ever going to find something like that. Then you alluded to it earlier, maybe they're like other apes. Maybe they bury their dead. Maybe they are like elephants and they throw rocks on top of the dead. Maybe they're like old dogs and they're already in remote locations, and they just crawl back in some briar patch that's 3 hills over the New River Gorge and would take you 4.5 hours to walk through off trail. And you can only do it when the leaves are off. It's just not likely that you would find something. Going back, I kind of got off topic there, but Gary, I keep that calendar. And so I was in Stroud's Run because there was 2 gentlemen that were fishing there, and they were fishing just before dark. They went up to get some wood to start a fire, and they went up into the woods, and they both ran into a Bigfoot that they saw. Both of them saw it, one animal. And so it was in my reports, and I was up there. I would visit the same places at roughly the same time of the year, hoping that maybe I would get lucky or something. And so it had rained a lot the night before. And so I went out there. I was the only car parked there. And so I got up there and got on the trails, and it was muddy, so I could see no one had been there but me. And Shade, my lab, is, running loose. He stays right by me. He's always 20 feet in front of me. And I carry a leash on me just because, if I see someone coming or whatever, then I can leash them. But we got up on top of this mountain, and I saw what I thought was a hiker. It was just about 60 yards from me, and it was all buff collared. And I thought that I saw backpack. And so, I just saw it, and instantly I just whistled at Shade. He was back to me probably in just a couple seconds. I clipped him on. We're walking in just less than 10 seconds. As soon as we start walking, I noticed the trail goes away. And so I knew that what I saw was off trail, and I got suspicious and ran up there, and there's a ridge right there where I could see the whole area, and there was just nothing there. And then what I found is that sometimes it's a disadvantage to be a woodsman and trapper and spend your whole life in the woods, because instantly your brain categorizes something. And so I glanced, boom, hiker. didn't think anything more about it. So now whenever I'm going in the woods, I always tell myself, pause at everything that you hear or see, to pay attention to it. But since that time, now I've been carrying the GoPro on my hiking stick all the time, because, if I would have had it on there then, it wouldn't have mattered that I only glanced up there for a second. That would have been enough. But that's just the nature of Bigfooting. There's not very many of the animals around. There's not very many across the country. It's a small number. Most people estimate in North America, including Canada, of course, that you're talking 4,000 to 20,000 animals, about one Bigfoot for every 100 bear.
So are you amongst the thought that it's a Gigantopithecus that come over on the Bering land bridge type of deal, or what's your thought? You don't know, or
that's what's most parsimonious. So anybody that kind of remembers when you were taking your classes in high school that Russia and United States, Alaska were connected during the Bering Land Bridge 10 to 20,000 years ago, there was ice over there, and things from Asia moved across and came into North America, and that's how everything got to North America. Whether you're talking about the indigenous people, all the animals, everything came there from that. So Gigantopithecus was the largest ape that we know of. It was 8 to 10 foot tall. We have fossils from it. We have bones from it, around, I don't know, a couple jaw bones and like 1,000 teeth. And it makes sense because it would have came across. And then earlier we were talking about the number 3 states for Bigfoot reports are Washington, Oregon, and California, which makes sense because those are the states that right there by the Bering Land Bridge and where everything comes through. So Gigantopithecus makes the most sense. There's some questions about whether it's a knuckle dweller or whether it's something that's upright. It used to be until about 10 years ago that everybody believed that it was a vegetarian, but now we know that's not true. So that makes big sense. Another thing is there's this thing called Paranthropus that's from Africa, and it essentially is a Bigfoot. It looks like a Bigfoot, is as tall as a Bigfoot. We have bones from it, have all that stuff. The problem is to get from Africa all the way around, you had to go through Asia, across the Bering Land Bridge, and we really haven't found bones from it in Asia. So we don't know that it went that far.
What about a short-faced bear? Right, they were 12 to 13 foot tall, right? Like, not that I haven't heard much talk about that. That's a little bit off topic, but what do you think about that?
Well, some people would think about, like, for a while, everybody was talking about lemurs. They would talk about the short-faced bear would be something that you would have the misidentifications and that type of thing. But I think that in general, the consensus at this point would be most people might say something to you like they would say it's a relic hominid, which essentially is it's something that hasn't been identified yet.
Okay.
So it's a safe answer to say something. I think that most of the people that are inside it more would probably try to be more specific, but the reality is that none of us know. But of course, Gigantopithecus is what makes the most sense.
But don't you think, like, another thing, not to get too far off topic, but like the like even our ancestry, I guess is what I'm trying to say, is complicated, right? It's not just I'm having a kind of brain fart, that's why I keep pausing, but like the most common like person that we're talking about is, that we make fun of this, a caveman.
Like Neanderthal. Yeah.
Neanderthal.
Well, and
it's not that clear from Neanderthal to human. It's a complicated tree of many branches, right? We've got like hominids that were little, hominids that were big, and nobody knows why certain ones went extinct and we survived. Nobody knows.
And it's changing.
Yeah.
Because we know it's a bush, it's not a tree. So we used to have people who would believe that there was no interbreeding, that they essentially one bred the other one out and was, but now we know that it's just not like that any longer. So, things like that have changed in terms of what people are believing. It's evolving. What was the first question that you asked me there? I don't want to miss that. I know that.
It's a good question.
He'd asked Gigantopithecus.
Yeah, after that.
Fairly well. It's all right. We got a bunch of people on this podcast with brain damage, so they're drinking bourbon and vodka. So good luck with all of this.
I'm actually I'm part of a couple groups, and I asked them if they had any questions. And this is something, and this is going to lead us a little bit off topic though. But when you ask questions about Bigfoot, you get kind of two kinds of people, right? You get the kind who kind of want to, if they don't believe, and I'm talking about non-believer Bigfoot guys. You get the guys who are interested and want to ask questions that are serious questions. And then you get the jokers who are like, ask him about this, hey, what size shoe does he wear, or that stuff. And so it's interesting. It's interesting, Waters. How do you deal with that? Not to get off of Gigantopithecus. But how do you deal with that? Because there are two people. I was a huge fan of Survivor Man. And so I never really believed in anything Bigfoot until Les Stroud said something. And when he said something, it held a lot of clout for me. I was like, well, shit, he's done this his whole life. He's been in the backcountry of Canada his whole life. Yeah. If he thinks something is real, then maybe I need to give it a little more attention.
Yeah, if you watch those episodes that we were talking about, the Bigfoot, Les Stroud Bigfoot shows, it's interesting on one of the very first episodes, he's in his tent and you can see the first time that he recognizes that there might be something there. You can just see it in his eyes because it changes your whole thinking.
And Russ, before you talk too, I want to mention this too for people that don't know. That kind of screwed up Les's career, right? Like he had a successful show called The Survivor Man.
Yeah.
And he had a couple Bigfoot encounters, and then he just went off track, right? He changed what he was doing, and then focused on Bigfoot, which now he has a YouTube show. He's not on TV anymore. You know what I mean? Like all those shows on YouTube, but also I would also want to mention, and listen, we all listen to Joe Rogan podcast mostly. Joe Rogan loves him. He's a friend, and he's been on the podcast. And Joe Rogan like literally kind of ridiculed him in a way, but I will also say Les kind of he deserves some of the ridicule because like this is what happens sometimes because you can't explain it because he'd say why do you not have trail cam footage? Why do you not have this? And Russ would, I'm sorry, I keep calling Les you.
Les.
Yeah, so Russ, but. So Les would always say, like, here's what happened. I put a candy bar in a tree and it disappeared, right? Or something like that. Yeah. And then Joe Rogan would question him and say, like, that's not proof. Like, who cares? Like, anybody could have ate that. And then, like, he would say, I think he might have been the one that said, like, well, we don't know if Bigfoot's magical and can fuck up trail cams. Or, you know, I mean, and that's what I've heard lately. And there's, like, a big thing of people saying that. And that, like, rather that's, you know, I'm not going to say rather it's true or not, but, like, that's going to make everybody fucked up. Like, you know,
well,
going down.
And one of the questions, because I'd asked my group, I was like, hey, do you guys have any questions for the Bigfoot guy? And one of the questions was, why does he always choose to be blurry in photos?
Yeah.
And like,
because he is blurry.
He's pixelated. Yeah. He's got
pixelated camo. That's what it is.
Yeah. Yeah. So the reality is, whenever I'm doing a show that some of the shows you do are legitimate skeptics, you know what I mean, where they have somebody on there that's, you know, they're going to be an anthropologist or whatever they're going to be, but there is legitimate Bigfoot evidence that's out there. For instance, you know, the average footprint is 14 inches, right? So that's the average size. That's the size shoe he would wear. But of course, they're a species. So, you know, we have tiny baby Bigfoot and we have extremely large, but we have, you know, in nature, in science, everything we get farther away from, it's a law of nature, the farther away from the equator, the larger things get. So the average size footprint does as well. So it seems hard to believe that people that are faking footprints, you know, would keep in mind, oh, we're in Florida, so we better use a 14-inch footprint. And when we go to British Columbia, let's use an 18-inch one. You know, it doesn't seem reasonable that way. And aside from that, you know, science has moved along. We have people that specialize in primate functional anatomy. Chiropractors can look at it, orthopedic surgeons can look at footprints, and there's a dynamic part of the footprints that are cast. You know, there's hundreds of footprints that have been cast, you know, over the past however many years. I mean, typically I probably find footprints 3 or 4 times a year. In Appalachia, you may just find one, because it's not like they're walking in the middle of a mud so you can be seen. The belief is that they're like monkeys and mountain lions are cognizant of leaving their footprints and try not to leave them unless they don't have a chance or a choice, I should say.
So so since you mentioned that, is that a belief that those two species do that? I don't know about that. It is.
Yes.
Okay. Interesting.
Yeah.
Why do they believe that, or who came up with that?
Just the scientists are studying them. But one of the things I think it's interesting too that people don't have a grasp on, like, there's primatologists right now that you know, they have a new species of little monkey that they have found. They're trying to get game camera pictures of it. So they're using 500 game cameras. It's been 3 years. They still don't have a picture. You know, and these are scientists that are able to like do this full time. In Bigfoot world, you have me, I'll be seeing patients tomorrow. I'm not in the woods tomorrow.
That's a good
And then
point.
we have the story of, like, here's this book, The Great Soul of Siberia. And it's about the Siberian tiger, and about, we knew it existed in similar numbers as Bigfoot, but no one had pictures of it. And so the first pictures, the guy that wrote this book, 6 months in Siberia, staying in a concrete, like, little thing that's about the size of a burial tomb and not moving, took 6 months to get the first pictures of it. You know, so no one's paying anybody in Bigfoot world to, you know, sit in the woods all day and try to come up with stuff. Most of the people are going out there. It's citizen scientists. So, you know, they're interested in the phenomena. They're out there at night, they're cooking bacon and hoping that something's going to come to their campfire and they hear a noise or whatever. But you have probably 100 legitimate researchers in the country that are following the scientific method, you know, and trying to come up with that. It's frustrating when some of the shows you'll do, they'll say, you know, it's like they forget, because, you know, they're talking to somebody who has a science degree and is a master naturalist, and they'll say, well, we don't think there's enough food to support a primate, you know, of that size or whatever. But that's been dispelled literally decades ago. So people aren't interested in Bigfoot. You know, like, Butch, you know, you got a wife, you got 3 kids, you got all these businesses you're running. I mean, so, you know, you're just trying to shuffle all your parts, let alone, it's not like you're keeping up with all the latest research in Bigfoot world, you know, or you may pass me and say, hey, anything new in Bigfoot world or whatever it happens to be. But, you know, most people just aren't doing that. They're not that interested in it.
That's a solid point. There's no money in somebody sitting all day looking for Bigfoot, right? I mean,
No.
right? Now, if you found them, there'd be some money, but there's no money until you do that. So it'd be an investment. But since we're on that topic, let me talk to you about a couple of things from your Tracking the Snowman book. Okay. And it's exactly what you're saying. And this is some questions I wrote down that you addressed in the book, but I think are super important, because these are the common questions. So one, I'll just mention them all, and then you can take them one by one. But and you've also kind of tackled them, so we're not going to be too far off topic. But here, so why not believing in Bigfoot is wrong? Okay, that's number one. Number two is there's not enough food to support a Bigfoot.
Yeah.
Right? That's number two. Number three would be no body ever found, which you've pretty much addressed. The 3, and then number 4, not enough land to really hide, right? Which would be number 4. I'm sure there's more, but let's tackle those 4. And again, you've kind of brushed on all these topics, but if you can remember those, and I've got them written down if you forget, but those are going to be the primary things that people use as rebuttals, right? And you've addressed them in the book, and that's why I wanted to bring them up, because anybody listening to this podcast, if we don't address them, that's the first thing they're going to say is like, well, I don't believe in it because there's just not enough land that they could be hiding in. There's not enough food that they could be having. Why haven't I ever found a body, right? Like all those things that we've all kind of brushed on, but like you can probably address a little bit more and elaborate on, if that's okay.
Sure. So we have more land now than we do since 1940. You know, the land is expanding largely because our croplands are decreasing. Sierra Nevada is the wilderness area there is largely greater than much of the tropical rainforest in South America and Africa. We have large places of woods that have, I'm not going to say never had someone go through, but are not commonly explored. How I know this in Ohio, West Virginia, is many times when I go into an area, I will mount a camera on the only path, trail, road that comes in, so I can see over a period of 3 months, 6 months, a year, legitimately how many people use that. And so a lot of times I establish relationship with the park rangers in all these parks because, you know, I'm sending them cool game camera pictures of bobcats and big bucks and stuff, and they're putting them on their websites. But I'm also in areas, the remote areas where they don't go to. And I may say Loper Hollow, which is a main hollow in this one park, but there's no trails there, that there's nobody that comes there between April and October. There's no humans. And after that, there was 3 bow hunters and there was 2 deer hunters, 2 gun hunters. No one killed a deer, you know, so they know all this type of things. There's people that, you know, like for instance, there's somebody, I ran into a pot patch and I had a picture of the people that were growing the pot on one of the parks. And so I just told the ranger about 2 months ago that I had another camera that was about a 3-mile walk in, and the same 2 guys were on my camera. So I told the ranger, they're looking for a new spot. Just keep in mind, this is where I saw them. So there's plenty of land. There's plenty of food. In the second book, I list all the foods, but no one even questions that, even the scientists any longer, that there's enough food for, you know, Bigfoot, if it exists, is an omnivore, which means that it eats everything. They're dumpster divers. They eat trash cans. They eat people's leftovers. They eat out of their gardens. They eat fruit trees. They eat deer. They eat any animal, snake that you can imagine. And there's reports literally with them.
Real quick, because earlier you said we know for a fact that they're not just vegetarians. How do you know that? What has led you to that? So the most obvious answer to that is that something couldn't exist in cold climates because the amount of calories it would take to survive without being an omnivore. You simply would have to be able to kill a deer, an elk, or whatever it happens to be, you know, for that to be able to exist. They're not vegetarians. You know, they commonly, you know, we hadn't really talked about this, but you know, the way that they look, that sometimes, you know, you'll hear them that they look a little apish. Sometimes you'll hear them, they look very human, but they have a nose that's similar to ours, but a little larger, and it's pushed down, it's flat. It is, their skin is like a dog's paw or nose through here, no hair around the upper part of the face, wrinkles along the eyes, and the hair on the forearms is longer, hanging down, than some of the you know, the rest of the body that you would see. Typically they have a reddish brown type coloring. You know, they may be black, but you know, has a little bit of a red tint, and that's pretty consistent with orangutans. It's probably not an orangutan family, but that's what it would be like. I'm looking over here. The no body found, of course, you know, I talked about how rare it would be for there even to be bodies to be found irregardless. And I don't think that most people, when they're in the woods, I mean, you wouldn't pick up a bone unless it was like this big skull looking at you. But the reality is that nature takes care of these things quickly. And when something dies, if it's in warm weather, that just in a matter of a week or so, all the bodies completely scattered and completely gone. And there's not really anybody looking out there anyways. One of the radio shows I just did from New Orleans a couple of weeks ago said, it seems like that if there was something out there like that, that somebody would have found it. And I said, well, I mean, who's somebody, man? I never see anybody. There's nobody in the woods. I mean, right now, we've never had a time in our life when people were in the woods less. They're afraid of the dark. They're afraid of getting lost. They're afraid of the animals. Don't talk about snakes. I mean, that's just where we are in our society. It's a more urban thing where people are on their phones. They're, you know, they're just not in the woods like they were.
I was just talking about this the other day with some coworkers about, you know, my childhood growing up was I I would, and this is just children. This isn't even adults, but like as a kid, I would come home and then me and my friends were in the woods. Now, granted, it was probably just the skirt of the woods that was around the homes and stuff, and it wasn't too deep into the woods. We weren't going miles and miles into the woods, but I remember being 7, 8, 9, cutting down little saplings, making bike paths and ramps for us to drive around on our bikes in the woods. And then, like I said, I got a little bit older, and I was a hunter, go into the woods, and I would hunt squirrels, or I'd go out with my uncle, and we'd go hunt rabbits or whatever. People don't do that anymore.
No.
I almost, there are times that I have to beg my son to stop playing video games to go outside, and so the outdoors is less and less attractive as far as people go. Like it used to be every year I would ask the family to go on a hike with me, just to get outside, and that it's like I guess we got to go on a hike for Father's Day. And so but
that's 40% of the kids are obese now, man. I mean, that just came out last week.
Yeah,
what are they going to do out there?
Yeah, and there's been an uptick since COVID that the obesity is actually up in children.
Yeah, it's just they're not something that they're really interested in. You think about even in Appalachia, I mean, most people in West Virginia, if they're not hunting like someplace where they park at, or they right at their house, they're riding a four-wheeler or side-by-side. I mean, so they're just not seeing the game. I can remember a while back on my farm, and I had a right of way that went through my property, and I was in a tree stand, and there was 4 does, and they were up near that right of way, and I heard a four-wheeler coming, and those does ran about 50 feet and stood real still, and the four-wheeler went past, had no idea that the deer were even there. And that's the way it is the majority of the time. The animals know where humans go. If you're something like a Bigfoot, it's been ingrained into you where food is year round, where people are, where people don't go, and don't forget that they are largely nocturnal. So behind you, I see the Patterson Gimlin film. And that's interesting. One of the things I think is so wild about Bigfoot is people that live in New York City or Chicago that literally have never even been to the woods will have an opinion of Bigfoot. And largely their opinion is based on that film, the 1967 film. So they don't review they don't know that there's 4 or 5 literal novels, books that have been written just about that. They don't know of all the other things that went into it, like that there had been a sighting for the last several years in that same area of 3 different animals, and there have been footprints found dozens of times, and people had been in there looking, and that it was a 25-mile gravel road through these Park Service road to be able to get down there, and that people were there for the next several weeks, that were outdoorsmen checking these tracks and all this other stuff. I mean, there's whole things that go into it, but what people do is they just look at that film and they say, well, they either believe it or they don't believe it. And the way it is right now in the country, it's 33%. About a third of the people believe and a third of the people don't. But that's, Chicago, New York, Miami, Charlotte, Dallas, that's all those places. But if you get into Appalachia, it's hard to find, or the Pacific Northwest, it's hard to find someone that doesn't have a story or doesn't know someone that's had something happen to them. And that's been my experience since I've been here in Southeast Ohio, where I grew up, in West Virginia these last 30 years. Is I see all these gentlemen that are in the woods, and I'll say, what's the weirdest thing you ever had happen to you in the woods, or you ever feel like something was watching, just asking different questions to get responses from this people. And I think that invariably that people have had things happen. But it's funny because I know Bobo from the TV show Finding Bigfoot, he had said, Russ, I got to know, like, what do your patients think? He's like, you've written a couple of books, you've been on TV with it a lot, you do these podcasts and interviews and stuff and magazine articles. What do they think about seeing a doctor that believes in Bigfoot and does this all the time? And it's funny that at least in Appalachia, it's not a big deal. Your patients spend time with you a long time, usually before they know you or whatever. So they know you're normal and that you're intelligent and you can communicate things well. So I think that
Well,
most
to
of them
me,
are
I was going to say,
good.
to me, that's kind of like saying, like, how do your patients feel about you being a Republican?
Yeah.
How do your patients feel about you? It's or Democrat or whatever it is. But like, we all have these, and it kind of leads me into my next question. But like, we all have these things that we have just standard differences on in opinion, and we can, for the most part, I know that's politically climatized time that we're living in now, but for the most part, it's okay to not think everything that I think, and we can still be friends, or I can still respect you as an individual. But how do you deal with not getting locked into an echo chamber? As far as like hearing something and being like, that guy, that's definitely a Bigfoot sighting, or how do you, because there are stories that is just like, that's, you're being silly. How do you, because you talked about the scientific method before,
Yes.
and it should be the standard as far as like,
Yes.
when it comes to anything that we're trying to investigate or whatever, should be under the scientific, come up with a hypothesis, and then we test that hypothesis, see if it's true. How do you not get locked into an echo chamber?
Well, it's a challenge, but the problem we have once again is that we have all the citizen scientists doing most of the research. And so what's going to happen is Bigfoot is going to get verified, whether it's a coal truck or a car or something hits Bigfoot, or a hunter shoots one, or however it happens. And then you're going to see the stodgy scientists that have largely refused to address the subject come out of their hiding inside the school rooms, and they're going to go into the field. And so until that time, we're forced to do what we're doing. There's a constant battle to try to make things, for instance, like I get things sent literally every day to me that are in magazines and whatnot. And many times I'll say, no, that's not this, or that's not whatever. And they'll go on to find somebody else that will say what they want. And I'll see things show up that, this is a Bigfoot picture, a possible Bigfoot picture, when I've already said, no, it's not, or whatever it happens to be. And so it can be frustrating that way, but I still think that the answer is that your standard has to be high. And I know that I frustrate many people when, they send me reports. Like I said, I'm getting them literally every day. I have a new Bigfoot, a new website up now. It's called thebigfootdoc.com, that I tried to do it just to generate more reports than you were getting from like the BFRO or from Facebook or whatever it happens to have, that people send you reports. But I think that, you just have to keep your standard there. It's not acceptable to me that, if you'll see these Facebook groups, there's literally 100 different groups on there, and they have a tree twisted over one way and they think that Bigfoot did it. And they have this scuff in the ground and they say it's a track, and they'll have a picture and they'll have some kind of red circle around it, and that's not legitimate evidence. And the reality is, a lot of things that we have, the scientists don't care about. So we have scientists that are looking at the footprints and are experts in it, but in general, the other scientists aren't trained in it and they just don't know. We have thermal footage, some of it really good, thermal cameras. Many of us have been carrying them for years. They're getting better in quality. People are using drones with FLIR thermals on them. And we have some really good pictures that are out there right now. And I was going to buy one of those myself, but the reality is that the scientists don't care. The scientists don't care how many casts you have. The scientists don't care about game cam pictures or anything like that. I think that it's legitimately going to take a body before people accept it. And then the way we are now with all the conspiracy theorists, if you had a body, some of the people would say that, that it wouldn't, wasn't real. But let me tell you, a big thing going back to like believing about it and what people say and about, your patients and all this other stuff in our society anymore, it seems like it's so rare to find people that are passionate about something. Yeah. And I don't care whether you're talking about, jujitsu or Bigfoot or whatever it happens to be. we've lost a lot of the passion in our society. And I think that people are attracted to people that have passionate about something, whatever it happens to be, regardless of how they feel, you know, whether they admire that passion and wish they had something like that they were interested in, or whatever it happens to be. But, and that's what I found, like tomorrow, you know, there'll be 100-something patients in there, and everybody wants to say, you know, someone will be buying a book and someone will say, you seen anything new or getting your reports, you know, they're interested in it. And I don't think that, you know, the internet's given us the ability to talk from a distance. But imagine, you know, you or Butch, I mean, you know, who's going to say something to you guys in your face that's not very nice, because they know they're getting ready to get their butt handed to them, right? But we can have all these guys from New York and say, you know, that maybe they're, you know, I don't make a stereotype, because they're probably making a stereotype about the West Virginian, but you know, they haven't been in the woods and they don't know about it. And they're like, come on, man, some of these things can't exist. I mean, you know, come on. Or you make a comment on Twitter and your Twitter handle is Bigfoot_doc. And so it says on there, you know, that you're an author and that you're, you know, you do this or whatever. And so you make a comment about the weather, and then someone will say, yeah, but you believe in Bigfoot.
Yeah.
Or whatever it happens to be. So, you know, that's kind of our society now, where people, you know, are shooting off from a distance. But the reality is, if you were able to sit down with them and have lunch with them, by the end of the lunch, they'd be pretty convinced there might be a chance that there's something there, because they just don't know all the stuff.
And that's exactly right. And I'm glad you brought that up, because here, speaking as somebody that I think I'm pretty rational. I'm a professional just like you, but I enjoy things like this. I do. And Gary laughs at me all the time, because a lot of times we have podcasts and I'd say, hey man, if I had my way, I'd just be sitting watching UFO and Bigfoot shows all day. I don't give a shit what you think. That's what puts me to sleep. I love it. It makes me happy. I don't give a shit if it's right or it's wrong. If there's a 1% chance, I'm good with it. It's funny, but the people that will make fun of me for that are the same damn people that believe QAnon and think Donald Trump and JFK Jr. are going to take over the world in a month. And every month that it doesn't happen, they don't, it's like there's never an end to their belief. Like, I'm like, hey, everything you believed was supposed to happen yesterday and it didn't happen.
Yes.
And they're like, okay, what, it might happen next week. Okay, well, yeah, Bigfoot might show up next week too. You know what I'm saying? It's like, it's kind of funny. But my belief is, here's the thing, I'm just open. Kind of what Gary says. He might be the kind of resident skeptic, but he's not really, because I'm the same way as Gary. And maybe you as example, none of us have proof for what we're saying, but I'm just open. I'm just not closing it off. Just like when somebody says blah, 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 I'm like, yeah, that's a cool story, bro. Maybe, you know what I'm saying? When somebody believes in Pizzagate with their molesting children under a pizza parlor, maybe, I don't know.
Yeah.
Probably not, because people went to this pizza parlor and couldn't find the underground cavern to all these things. So it was just probably not. But you know what I'm saying? Even that, I'm like, well, maybe, but I'm not into that one as much as I am to the other things, just because what I want to mention is the same thing, like a couple of things you brought up. It's funny. I work for Boston Scientific, which is a medical device company, right? Big company, super important, you know, big company. I remember I'm meeting a guy from Oregon just as a joke, right? I was like, hey, you're from Oregon. You ever seen Bigfoot? Literally a joke, hoping that he would answer correctly, but a joke. Most likely thinking he's going to say, shut the fuck up, retard. You know, and he said, I've seen him twice. No joke. I was like, really? Tell me about it. No joke. You know what I mean? And I pulled him aside after the initial thing that I was like, I'm surprised you're answering me. And he said, yeah, one time he went up with a girl at some place and was trying to make out with her. He felt this feeling that he was being seen, blah, blah, blah. I don't remember the whole story. I'm going to ruin it. But lo and behold, they both saw what they thought was Bigfoot. Saw him twice. Similar story the second time, right? Then one time I was in Hawaii. And I bring this up because both things you brought up, because and I want to mention this too, because Russ, you're doing a great job. Every question I've got, every little note I've got, you brought up. So you're killing it. But
that's good.
Yeah. Another time I was in Hawaii, which was a funny story, because I was in Hawaii in the NFL Pro. That's when they used to do Pro Bowl there every
Pro Bowl.
time. Yeah, it was always in Hawaii. And so at that time, I think it was around 2009, I was a giant. Like I was huge. I was getting ready to do the CrossFit Games, trying to pretty jacked. So everybody thought I played for the NFL. So everywhere I went, they'd ask my wife, like, who does he play for? I play for nobody, clearly. But anyway, so we were sitting there, we were meeting these people, and they're from British Columbia. So every time I meet up like somebody that's from like a Bigfoot sighting place, I'd be like, hey, you saw Bigfoot? So these people are like, absolutely. I was like, are you serious? So the whole dinner changed from like, are you in the NFL to like, tell me about Bigfoot, right?
Yeah.
So the same story. This guy said, yeah, man, I'm in these remote places in British Columbia that just rains all the time, that nobody goes to. I've saw these things I can't explain, blah, blah, blah. So like we talk and talk. So it's like when you meet the people in the exact areas, like you get these extremely cool things, really, honestly. Again, it's always things you can't explain, but that's what piques my interest. Unlike some of these conspiracy theories, I know I was kind of playing around and saying some stuff, but like, you know, these people that believe in QAnon, they actually never have anything to like back up their story because they always fail.
Yeah.
Or maybe not. Actually,
Right.
I'll be fair because I don't really follow QAnon, because maybe they do. I don't know. Maybe that's why they follow it. But it's funny because those same people that believe in the most absurd stuff, because believe me, JFK Jr. died in a plane crash. He's not coming back as vice president with Donald Trump that I know of, right? Those people believe that ultimately, but they don't believe in Bigfoot, and they don't believe in whatever else. You know what I mean? Like UFOs, aliens. You know, it's just so funny that people will dismiss something that doctors, lawyers, professional people see something that they can't explain. Look, you can go back and you can say, look, it could be a bear walking upright. There's a video behind Gary playing this, not on the screen because, you know, I'm talking right now and I know how this works, but not a lot of people can explain that video, right? And Gary ducks so we can look at it. But the Patterson Gimlin footage is very compelling. Now, here's one thing that I wanted to ask you, and we're jumping all over the place, but I've got a million questions to ask you. And Gary, thank you for clearing your throat so I can look at this video. That's very good. I've watched the rebuttal to this video, Russ, and I'm sure you have too. And I also know that you address this in your book, that you have pictures with Gimlin. You've met Gimlin. You feel that he's a credible source.
Yeah.
Who is the guy that says he possibly was in the suit? And they have video of him looking like he walks like this dude.
Yeah. Bob Peroni.
What? So what do you think about that? As a guy that believes, and I've heard the video and I can't remember because I'm old as shit and I get punched in the face.
Yeah.
So what do you think about that?
So, you know, it's interesting. Like I just literally, I'll think of what it is and give it to you later. There's a podcast that visits all different types of controversial subjects. And they just did a 6-part series on the Patterson Gimlin film, 9 hours. Nice. So, you know what I mean? Yeah, you had to be pretty invested in Bigfoot to want to listen to something 9 hours. And so I think that, you know, all of them have passed lie detector tests. If you've been to that location, it's just not reasonable to think. I mean, there was people that they have all these witnesses that were right down there and that there was no one else there. And it's not like you can hide, you know, when you're going to stage something, you know, there's not tracks there at that time that were other people or whatever it happens to be, because as soon as they said they had something, then people were there instantly, you know, to see what they could find, news people and everything else recording all these things. And all these things are on video. But one of the things that you hit on, Butch, that I think is the most compelling thing is like, you know, there's legitimate evidence that's out there that makes it compelling. But the thing that makes it most compelling is the witnesses. And you have, I don't remember, is like the head of the UCLA or the USC medical school had a sighting. Very famous people in our country have had sightings. You know, some of our presidents have told Bigfoot stories. And so I think that more weight needs to be attached to that, because of course, you know, there's just in Appalachia, there's 5 different Indian tribes that have names for Bigfoot. We have Historically, going back to the 1800s, stories in our newspapers, we have indigenous people have petroglyphs of Bigfoot type creatures that are on there. And when you ask a cop, for instance, they'll say, well, people are notoriously bad about being witnesses or whatever. But the reality is that they're only bad at certain things. Like, they may not be that great at distances. They may not be that great at like heights, but they probably don't have a problem seeing whether or not something is human or not human. And so I think that we need to attach more weight onto those things. And so when you're start doing the thing that I have done, of course, you start doing it because you're interested in the subject, because something happened to you that you couldn't explain, and you'd been in your woods your whole life, and you just needed to find an answer to it. And you examine the footprints and you see the functional morphology, the functional changes in the anatomy as something's walking, and you know that a human couldn't possibly do it. And some of the other rules, like the size and the length of the footprint we were talking about, and locations they're found, and the recordings that are out there now, people doing long duration recordings, they're analyzed by sound professionals to say that, they're not something that exists. There's hair that's found that's not consistent with any other type of hair. And you add on to that, you start interviewing witnesses. You've done 100, you've done 200, you've done 300, you've done 400. And most of them are, you're saying maybe, maybe not. You're doing a lie detector test. Most of them are passing it. But every now and then you'll just get those exceptional witnesses, NASA engineers, sheriffs with long careers. You'll get these exceptional park rangers, I'm trying to think of the park ranger that was really renowned out of Yellowstone that just retired. His name's Action Jackson. And Yellowstone, one of the most remote places in the United States, that they have from one point, it's 30 something miles in any direction to be able to find a road. And Action Jackson was the ranger that was in charge of watching to make sure there was no poaching, nothing like that. And now that he's retired, he came out and he had a Bigfoot sighting when he was in there, and I'm pretty sure that he probably knows what's normal and what's not normal and what something else is. And there's all different kinds of park rangers that have came out and said that they've seen different things and had experiences across the country. And, in public, people may proclaim one thing, or professionals associated with the parks, but I can tell you that many of us have relationships and private conversations with those same people. And, I would say that they think that there's at least a chance, and at the very least, they've had some things happen to them that they can't explain.
So I'm gonna get up on a soapbox for just a second about something that you said that bothers me, and this is kind of off of the Bigfoot realm and just kind of like general perception. I've never understood why somebody would say that a lawyer or a police officer or a doctor is a credible witness versus somebody who's a truck driver or a clerk, or it and I understand that education has something to do with it, but I know plenty of people who do maybe lower education, high training, like on the job training jobs, that are credible people. And it's interesting to me that we discredit people who do lower paying service jobs as like not credible, when if you look at, I don't know a politician that I've ever heard of that is a credible person. They all lie to us. And so it's amazing to me. It's amazing to me that, and like I said, this is a little bit off topic and it's me getting on my soapbox, but it is amazing to me that we dismiss people who are everyday people, who have shared experiences, as most people do, because most people are not lawyers, doctors, or politicians. They have that same shared experience of doing the 9 to 5 everyday thing. And because they're not doctors, lawyers, or politicians, they're somehow not credible.
Yeah.
It's just
So
a solid point. I don't want to cut you off, Russ, but that's a solid point, Gary, because listen, everybody we admire lies to us every day. I know everybody loves Donald Trump, and if you love Joe Biden, whatever, they all lie to you every day. So like,
yeah.
that's a solid point, but let's end that with that. But that's a solid point there. Good job.
Yeah. I think that I've had some really compelling people that were maybe even people that wouldn't have finished high school that, that are honest. You can just tell the way that they are, and they're woodsmen, and they can say, I don't care what you say. And I've had several people to tell me this. I don't care what you say. I know what I saw. And it's compelling, but you're trying to put something forth that is controversial and something that requires a great deal of proof, an extraordinary amount of proof. So sometimes I love it when I get, like, I know I published at one point a medical doctor had a sighting. It was an exceptional one, and it was 1964. But I liked it because, the perception in the public is that if you get someone like a police officer, they're a trained observer, so they might have a better idea, or, not be stressed at a time of stress and be able to really give a clear picture. And people perceive certain things. I know it's not the way it is. And of course, if you read the book, you'll see that, I have all different types of people in there and I'll go and visit them and, let them tell their story if it's a good one or whatnot. I mean, frankly, I love hearing the old stories because it establishes a historical pattern in certain areas and I keep track of it. But, I used to ambulance chase, everybody would call me and say, hey, a year ago, I saw a Bigfoot and blah, 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 blah. Well, I'd be right up there looking around, but it doesn't help you get to where you're going. So, I have places that I'm at now that I spend at least a couple days a weekend all the time. I'm there, my game cameras are there, I'm doing my thing. You're establishing relationships with the people in the area. And, that's just what you're doing. It's the long game.
Here's another thing I want to ask you, because as I was refilling my vodka Red Bull, you guys were slightly hitting this, and Russ, you mentioned this, Stone Man. So the title of your first book was Tracking the Stone Man, right?
Yeah.
And you mentioned in your book that was a Cherokee Indian saying, right?
Yes.
And correct me if I'm wrong, but in Ohio, are they not called the Moss Man or something along that lines? Am I wrong?
The Grass Man.
Grass Man, yeah.
But that's not an Indian name. That's just a name that's been established with pioneers historically.
Yeah, well, and even that. So we have Bigfoot, we have the Stone Man, we have the Grass Man, we have Sasquatch, we have
Skunk ape.
Yes, exact, skunk ape. And we know that the Indians or the Native Americans had, hundreds of names for this. And that's actually what adds credibility to this thing, because before this all became, a pop culture phenomenon, the Native Americans have been talking about this forever, right? And they've got, hundreds of names.
Hundreds of years.
Yeah, they have all these names for these creatures. They've got stories about these creatures. They have things that are going on, and in my mind, that adds a lot of credibility, because they're not making up things because they need credibility, or making up things because of clout or stories, right?
Right.
So, and I noticed in your book, you're like, hey, because of Appalachia, I'm gonna call this Stone Man, but later we're gonna call this the Bigfoot. It's just a name. What do you think about all that? I know that's kind of a broad question, but specifically, I guess what I'm saying is, with the Native American culture, is even if you want to dismiss this all, they've got folk tales, they've got stories they told by the fire, all about this, right? That adds credibility to this subject. What do you think about that? What do you think about the Cherokee Indians calling this a Stone Man? It's kind of a big deal. Like, and the reason I bring that up is because I think sometimes people think this is a a phenomenon that's now. It's not really. This has been going on forever, right? This is
Yeah.
not just now, right?
Yeah. Everybody just thinks about, 1950 something. I think it was 1958. There was a gentleman who was doing roads through the wilderness in the California area, and he kept having these large footprints show up when they would come back to work the next day. Of course, they're in the middle of nowhere. And at one point, they've had trailers tipped over, and they had these drums that weighed hundreds and hundreds of pounds tipped over. And, there was only these large footprints and nothing else in that area, which was all dirt, because, it's kind of like, when they're making a road or a logging area, it's just all mud and dirt there everywhere. So you can see what was working there. But everybody thinks that it all started when, the Bigfoot film in 1968, but it existed a long time before that. There had been plaster casts, all that, like I said, petroglyphs, all this stuff going back hundreds and hundreds and hundreds of years. I know some of the researchers hate that it was called Bigfoot as an anonym, so to speak, because, they like Sasquatch better, which was kind of a Americanized, anglicized name that one of the Indian tribes in the Pacific Northwest, which I think it was like, I wouldn't know how to pronounce it, but it was Sasquatch or something like that. And they put two words together and they came up with Sasquatch. That's how we got that. And so, I think that people have to look at the whole package of Bigfoot. It's not a soundbite where they can show Patty walking and in film 352, slide 352, she's turning around and looking at us, and that you can see that she has breast, and that you can see the individual muscles, and that, all this other stuff, and the backstory that goes on. I mean, it's a whole big deal to know all of it, but it's putting all of it together with the footprints, the other pictures that are around, the witness stories, the hair, that make it compelling. But the problem with it is that the animal is rare. And that's the whole problem, because we have similar animals around the world that are rare, that people have trouble documenting as well. But when something sounds like it's in, some African rainforest, it sounds more, or the ocean, it sounds more believable somehow, or more likely than it does. And how you were talking before about the scientists, we used to think that there was all these trees, and this one did this and this one did that, and there was all this man and homo and blah blah blah. And of course now we know it's a bush, and they were interbreeding and all doing this stuff, and things change. And largely the way that Bigfoot was rejected was because the old science believed that you can only have one animal fulfilling each spot in the environment. But now we know that not to be true. But the problem is that, and I've heard some of the scientists that are involved in Bigfoot talk about this. The older scientists are just not willing to compromise. They're not willing to hear the argument. They're not willing to look at the evidence. They're not trained in the evidence that comes in. But the younger scientists are interested. And so many people believe that in the next 10 years or so, we're going to see the universities change a lot of stances. We're going to, it's going to be interesting. I think that once evidence come out, I've said that once it comes out, I think a lot of evidence is going to come out. For instance, I'm always trying different features on my game cameras, where they're set up, how they're set up, whether they're up with a ladder, they're on the ground, they're inside a tree, they're under a log, they're in all these different places. But once I figure out how to get a picture of them and it can be replicated, then a lot of people get pictures. And I believe that there's people now that are holding pictures, videos, maybe bones, who knows what, that they don't want to be called crazy. They don't want to be called this. They don't want to be thought of as weird or whatever it happens to believe. And they're just holding all that stuff, and a lot of it will come out. And I know a lot of that because commonly when researchers are together and when we're talking, a lot of times people are saying that they've seen pictures, they've been shown this in confidence, that, no one's allowed to see it. And I mean, you hear that all the time. Like I remember one of my friends that's in Kentucky, he had met with this guy that was this old farmer, and he had this corn thing out to feed the deer, and he had a game camera on it, so he could get a picture of some bucks or something. While this Bigfoot showed up to get corn and was squatted down right in front of the camera so you could see it. And it looked old. It was like balding and its hair was thinner and gray. And, maybe it wasn't at a point where it would could compete for food as much anymore. But this old gentleman, if you went to his house and, you knew somebody that knew him, and asked to see it, that he would let you come in, and he had the SD card hidden somewhere. And, you would have to wait while he went to get it. And then he came in and he would show you and all this stuff. And, and it was, pictures of snuck out of it or whatever. But there's a lot of stories like that all across the country of cases like that. And I think that there'd be people that'd be surprised. Like, we were talking about politicians. It's been said that Rand Paul from Kentucky has had a Bigfoot sighting. Mitch McConnell supposedly had a Bigfoot sighting, and some of the other stories that are around. I think that, like I said, you ask anyone that's been in the woods very much, if they have a story where, they heard something or saw something that they never heard before, or something made them leery when they were in the woods. I mean, I was in the woods as a kid, trapping, and I'd have to go at night. I go at night in the morning, and I was out there at night as a young kid by myself, in these rock cliff and caves and crags, crawling around with my little flashlight, looking to see if I had something. And, I don't think it's something mean. I mean, heaven knows it could have killed me many, many times over if it was, like that in its personality. And I think that that's one of the things that people get interested too. I don't know if you guys have heard of the Missing 411 series.
Yeah. What is that?
It's a guy by a retired police detective from Los Angeles named David Pilates. And David's written 2 Bigfoot books that were really good. And then he started uncovering missing people, and he found out that the National Park Service wasn't keeping track of missing people in the national parks.
Interesting.
So he started doing freedom of information requests and finding out, how many, and if he found pockets, then he would go and try to make contact or interview the people that, their family, and hear the circumstances behind it. There's some shows now on YouTube and Prime Video. They're really popular. Some of them are number one, in different genres. And, it's pretty cool stuff that's out there. I'm not sure that originally I thought that maybe David thought that, once again, I'm not speaking for him. I've corresponded with him some, but I thought that maybe he thought that, Bigfoot may be responsible for some of these people that were hiking in remote places and they disappear. But I've heard since that he believed that there was only a small percentage of them that were responsible, that there might have been something like that related to him. But, we have those commonly. I remember last time I was up hiking at Cranberry, there was some pictures of a guy that was he was an outdoorsman, a survivalist, an expert in it. And he'd spent like 6 weeks in a national park and living like that in New Mexico. And then he's from Charlotte. He came up to West Virginia and told his family that he'd be out in 1 month. He just never came out. They take all these dogs and searchers in, and they've just never found him. And there's a lot of people like that around.
Go ahead.
One of the things, let me tell you this, one of the things, how hard it is to find people is 20 years ago, there was a guy that parked on the New River Gorge Bridge and just stepped out of his car and jumped over the bridge, committing suicide. And they didn't find him until 2 years ago. And they literally could see where he jumped.
Yeah.
There was witnesses that said he just walked right over and jumped right off. But, the terrain in many places is so unforgiving and, hostile, just hard to get to places that, there's a lot of things we just don't find and see.
No. And what do you think? This is what I was thinking about what you're talking about while you're talking the last statements. But what do you think about the Alaskan? I think they're called the Alaskan Triangle. There's a whole show about people that go missing in Alaska. But it's very similar, right? I don't know if they're blaming Bigfoot on this situation but who knows? But anyway, it's a very similar situation because it's like a vast wilderness that nobody has, it's not very explored. There's people not going there. And I think it's the number one place like people go missing at. Do you know what I'm talking about? It's a whole series.
Yeah.
I've never watched the series, so that's why.
It kind of came on after the missing 411 stuff.
Yeah, that's what.
And like I said, if anybody wants to watch it on TV, there's some really interesting cases. And I've read the books, and it was funny because one of my friends in Columbus had been reading the books, and I hadn't really read them or whatever. And he's like, I got to ask you, man, are you carrying a gun when you go in the woods? And, I mean, I am when I'm hunting or whatever, in the past. But I mean, if you're, a pretty good big guy and you're wearing, you're carrying a stick, I mean, you feel like you're okay. You know what I mean? Like there's probably not much out there. But as time went on, and I had read some of the missing 411 things, and I was like, well, I don't know, maybe something occasionally happens. And and you're in remote places, and there's people growing pot in the parks, and there's these guys, they're sitting on these dead end roads, and you come out of the woods, and they're there, and it's just you. So I started carrying all the time since then.
That's a good point. I wanted to bring this up earlier. So Gary doesn't know you as well as I know you, but you're a beast in a good way, right? You got some big arms. You might have 24-inch pythons like Hulk Hogan. Right? I'm joking. You're not laughing because you probably do have 24-inch pythons, right?
I know they're not 24.
Yeah.
I know what it would take. It's kind of funny. One time I was in Columbus because I was working some of the people. I was working with some of the fitness models, and so Arnold Schwarzenegger had invited, like, I don't know how many of us. There was a group of us to have lunch with him that were in this, and then he would come around and talk to us, and that kind of stuff. So I told him, I said, I don't know, you guys you're younger than me, so you may not remember. Lee Haney was a black bodybuilder, and Lee Haney had. All right,
we're not that young.
So Lee Haney had these huge arms. Yeah. And so I told Arnold when I was talking to him, I said, I want Lee Haney's biceps. And he said, "Gets better genetics."
Yeah, no doubt, man. Well, it's funny. So we and obviously Gary's close to the Arnolds, which I used to go every year. And you could go to like a dinner with Arnold at one point, which before COVID, you could go to dinner. That's when he was still married to Maria Shriver. And
that's cool.
Yeah, and I had a great dinner with him and Maria. I've got some great pictures. And actually, even before that, you could go watch them work out. Like everybody was doing the Arnold Classic. Whoever were doing the Arnold that year, it was like not as big of a deal as it is now. But anyway, the point is, I would go work out with those guys. They'd warm up before they'd work out. It was amazing. It's funny because I think the Arnold dropped off a little bit because of COVID, but that thing is amazing, right? Amazing. Yeah. Everything they did, that was the first thing. Like we did grappling there. They have the pump and run, right? We bench press and then get some time off in your 5K time. Amazing event, right? But my point is, so do you work out to go out into the woods because you're like, hey man, I might meet Bigfoot, I need to kick his ass? Because the funny story, the reason I'm going to ask this story is because one time I was out in the woods with my ex-girlfriend, and a deer like tried to attack me. It jumped up on all two. Oh my
gosh.
Yeah, it jumped up on its back legs, and it was like kicking like this. And I saw a video on some random thing where a guy got attacked. He was covered in deer urine, and he was attacked. And anyway, so I came with this whole philosophy: if deer attacks me, I'm gonna do a 4-3-2, which is an uppercut, left hook, straight right, because they're going to come up in their hind legs. They're going to be kicking like this. The best place for me to attack the deer is a straight uppercut, left hook, straight right. I was like, oh, fuck a deer up. But I need to get ready for this. Do you have any kind of workouts ready for a Bigfoot? And I say that because you're a monster and everybody talks highly of you. You take some kickboxing at the gym, but everybody's like, Wes is a beast. And I know you did kettlebell workouts before you came, and you worked out before you came, but anything, are you thinking about that when you hike? Because you should. Like, I know, again, we talk about Joe Rogan all the time. That's what inspired the podcast. He works out like a madman before he goes out to hunt, right? And he should. Mm-hmm. Right? You should work out, because if you see Bigfoot and you can't take a breath because you saw him, that's not going to do any good. If you work out and you're ready to go and you see him and you can take a stable video or a shot or this or that. That's what we're looking for. Is that what you're thinking, or no? You're like,
I'm
you're
just doing it strictly so that I can do it for many years. That I won't be. I think it's 2 weeks from now I turn 57, so I don't want to get 65 or 70 and not be able to go spend the time in the woods that I want and desire.
Yeah.
That's what I'm really after. Aside from that, like seeing patients, I just believe that around 75% of chiropractors are either college or pro athletes. At least that's what it used to be when I started. And so I believe heavily about not being a hypocrite, living the life that when you're in that room and someone's talking to you, that when you tell them about a vitamin and working out, that you're living that life and that's what you're doing. And so, I'm passionate about that. But I mean, that being said, I remember a couple of years ago, I was on top of some mountain and it was kind of like, maybe you've been an old coal mine or something. It was kind of slatey coming down. I was sliding down it. I remember thinking, you're getting a little older, so you probably need to carry the things with you that you could spend the night because you got hurt and you would feel comfortable. And for me, that was having a light. So, I'm always carrying a headlamp with me, and I'm always carrying a gun now, and I always have a way to start a fire. And that's just the only things that I for sure carry. Now I'm carrying a backpack, and when I'm in the woods, and it could be that I have a lot more things in it than that, but I will never go without just those couple things, because many times I'm in areas where there's not cell phone service and I'm not going to be able to get help, if I have something happen.
Interesting.
Well, okay, so now that we're kind of talking about being out in the woods and the outdoorsy stuff, so I want to put on some people to things that I have found on YouTube, or things that I think are important as far as like, if you want to go out into the wilderness, and that's the thing, is like, you don't know what's going to happen. You might fall and sprain your ankle and need to be there for a night or whatever. Some guys that I like, obviously I'm a huge Stroud fan, so anything and everything, if you can watch any of the Survivor Man series, I think those are great, because what he's doing on those, as far as educational purposes, just like, hey, you don't know what's going to happen, this might be what you have. You should have some sort of plan before you ever go out, but if you don't, this is kind of what you can do. And then there's another guy online, David West, David David West, West. The David West channel is all about starting fire. And he does it with bow drills. He does it with hand drills. He does it with magnifying glass. He uses old Gatorade bottles that he finds on the side of the road and uses those as a magnifying glass to start fire. He also, cotton, he calls them fire rolls. And I didn't know this, but if you take a cotton ball and fan out the cotton ball into a strip, put wood ashes in it and roll it back up into almost like a cigar shape or a joint shape, and then rub it between two boards with a lot of friction, you start an ember, and you can pull that ember apart and start fire. And so, like any outdoorsman, I encourage you to watch those kind of things. David West channel is really important. But all of that stuff, like, if you're going out into the woods, you should have a plan. You shouldn't go out there without a plan. And it kind of brings me back to what I was saying, and, I was thinking before, I respect, and I don't want to come off as saying that I don't respect like doctors and lawyers and politicians as far as what they've done, but their education has been in books and in classrooms, and it's not necessarily been in woods. And somebody who kind of ties those together is somebody like Jane Goodall, who is a huge supporter in the idea that Bigfoot could be real and that Bigfoot could be out there. And if somebody like Jane Goodall, who lived her life, around chimpanzees and gorillas and stuff like that, if she can believe that it's a real thing, and I did come off as a skeptic today, there is a touch of me that believes that Bigfoot's real. And I've never dismissed it. I just don't have any proof that he is real. But if somebody like Jane Goodall believes that it's a real thing, or that it's a possibility that it's a real thing, then, who am I to say that it's not something that needs to be investigated, and that it's not, and maybe it is just something we haven't got enough resources invested into.
Okay, so if that's the case, Gary, think about this. Jane Goodall, chimpanzees, there's hundreds of thousands of them. There's a lot of them. Do you know how long it was before she saw her first one when she was in the woods? Months.
Yeah.
Months.
She was out there for a long time before anything really happened. And then even before she could start actually having any kind of relationship, she was there for months after that. So
yeah, I mean, so you don't have anybody doing that in North America. I mean, everybody is part-time. And like I said, many of the people doing it don't have the training of Jane Goodall. Jane Goodall was getting paid the whole time to go out there and sit. I mean, there's a lot of people that have advanced degrees that would be interested in getting paid to go out there and sit down and do the Bigfoot thing full time. I mean, I'm hoping that it won't be very many years that I'll be, getting a chance to do it a lot more than I am right now. I really think that I could solve it. And I know a lot of my friends feel like that if you just had the time. And that's one of the questions, like in the back of the book, I asked a couple well-known researchers, if resources, weren't an issue, what would you do? If money and time weren't an issue, what would you do? And Bigfoot just
that's kind of,
smiles.
I don't know how much NPR you listen to, but I'm a big fan of the Radio Lab stuff. And they always have the question, if I could write you the unlimited amount of money check for you to do what you need to do to find Bigfoot, how would you spend that money? So I'll put that to you. How would you spend that money? You've got a blank check. You can do anything and everything you need to do. What is it that Russ Jones needs to do to go and find Bigfoot, or at least to put forth the proper effort to find him?
If I had my dream, it would be that it would be just me or maybe one other person that was in a very, very remote area that had not seen human contact very much commonly. And there's places like that in the United States and Canada that you can go. And I would try to habituate a relationship over a period of months. And, some of the people are doing that. There's cases, I don't know how, I've done quite a few cases through Appalachia of habituation where people are having a relationship with something and they believe it's Bigfoot or they've seen it multiple times, but it takes a long, long time before, you can approach something like the chimp for Goodall. And I'm sure it's the same with these type things that, where you could establish a relationship of leaving food out or whatever it happens to be, where you're trying to get some type of, DNA evidence that, as part of the problem we have, like the hair that's representative of Bigfoot doesn't have the center portion called a medulla. It's empty. And that's where most of the DNA is at. So it's very, very hard to get, if you get a hair, then it's hard to get it, then who are you going to get to do it? It's around $5,000, to be able to get a DNA sample. There's new types of DNA analysis come out. eDNA is relatively new. Everybody in the Bigfoot world has a lot of hope that eDNA will produce some results. So I would probably want to try to do that type of testing and be somewhere in the middle of nowhere. And it'd be nice that, no one, I'm thinking, gosh, if you think about all those fun things, you could only you goes to town and you pick up food and no one's out there. And gosh, it'd take a special person to be able to do that too for months at a time, to have little or no contact, because, the animal is, curious about humans in general, but reticent, most of the time to have any type of contact. So it'd be interesting to see how long, before something would show up. And, once again, it has to be in a good location as well, something that has a history of Bigfoot in it.
Well, and that's kind of my next question. Where would you center your research around? Would it be somewhere over in, the Seattle, or not Seattle, but Washington, California, Oregon area? Would you do something, what you're doing kind of now in the Southeast Ohio down into West Virginia area? Where would your ideal location be? Or would
Well, I mean,
you
I
have
think
multiple? Ideally, would you have multiple locations?
I don't think so. I think that you have to choose one location. You have to live with it. I mean, I think it's interesting how many reports Ohio gets. I think it's because, Ohio has a lot of farmland and a lot of roads, quite a bit of population, but they still have some woods and stuff. So there's not that much wood. So sometimes these things are creeping out and being seen. I know that, I've had a farm the last 20 years in Athens, and the location I have now was based on, I thought that there was a good chance that something could happen at that location, and so that's why I have it. I don't keep cameras right around the house because, like I said, I think that there's a reason why we're just not getting good pictures. So I kind of keep trying to evolve the camera thing, but it's not right there. I may put them around the fields to see if I have nice bucks or whatever, but not in the woods close to the house. I put out, for instance, sweet mix, which is something that you feed horses and cows. That historically there's been some incidents of them going after that. So I have sealed containers out there. I've had one disappear so far, but does that mean it's anything? No, it doesn't mean it's anything. It's incidental. But that's what I'm going to be doing in the next several years. I'm going to continue to do what I'm doing that way and hope that I can get lucky.
Which is amazing, right? I think following up what Gary said, which is amazing questions. I want to ask you a couple quick things before you go. You've done a great job of answering everything. I think honestly, if we were going to have somebody on here talking a bit about Bigfoot, you've answered all the major points, right? Which again, you're used to doing this. You were just on the Animal Planet like just the other day. And I apologize if I'm slurring my speech. I've drank like 12 bottles of vodka and everything else. So like just to make sure I was good. But you did a good job. But here's what I want to ask you. A couple of things. Let me start with this first, because we just kind of finished on this, what Gary was asking. Like, of the shows that I've watched, they've had some hair evidence, right? And they've had some DNA. And then they test it, and it kind of comes up like inconclusive, right? It could be human, it could be primate. But in my opinion, like a lot of times we'll end the show with like, that's a failure. But I'm like, well, that's the point, right? Like you don't know what it is, right? Is that what you think? Is you think because they can't identify it? Is that like something that we don't know? Or do you think, I don't know what these shows are trying to prove either. But it's always like, hey, somebody saw something on this lane, this strange highway in Ohio, and here's some hair that was caught in a barbed wire fence, and here it is. And then we don't know what it is. That's how they end the show.
Yeah.
But as a Bigfoot researcher, are you like, do you have a little bit more information than that? Does that make sense?
The Expedition Bigfoot, which is the show that's popular right now, it's not as popular as Finding Bigfoot was. And I was on Finding Bigfoot several times, and I was there several more times when they were doing the filming because, those are my friends.
Yeah.
And, it's not exactly the way they would do it because, it's a TV show. So like one time, for instance, I had got them a good location, and the producer's like, well, what do you think about this place? And I'm like, well, it's West Virginia, so anything's possible and it's good. But I'm like, well, what's the deal? And she's like, well, it's just hard to get catering and stuff down there where you're wanting to go, and I'm like, well, what's the name of the TV show? TV shows like Finding Bigfoot, shouldn't we be doing that?
Yeah.
But, and then the new show now, and there's a lot of Bigfoot shows that are on right now, but Expedition Bigfoot's on that is pretty popular. And I enjoy all the shows. I mean, probably the problem for me is that, a lot of times I know most of the people and I probably know more than I should. And so it makes it hard to enjoy some, but, they got some evidence, some eDNA they tested, and it came back interesting. Like, I want to say the scientists that looked at it said it was a high percentage of DNA that was consistent, similar to a chimp. So, no one's really sure what that means, but
That's kind of the point, though. Every time I hear something like that, I'm like, that's kind of the point. We don't know what it is, right? Like we
yeah.
always say that, and you're like, well, yeah, that's the point. Like, what does that mean? And they end the show with that. Like, I don't know if they're doing that on purpose or what they're doing there.
I mean, I think the reality is too, when you think about it, all the shows have people going out at night, right? Because when people go out at night, you go out at night for an experience. It's not like you're going out there for evidence, because if you have, like on Finding Bigfoot, they had a thermal that was a $25,000 thermal. And last year, was it last year? They had a special episode after, it was a 2-hour special after they had been off the air for 2 years. And so all the witnesses, largely, I think, except for one, was my witness. And so I brought them into a specific place, and they had a $50,000 FLIR that had a thermal on it, really good stuff. And they got something that was upright and walking, but no one cares. I mean, and you're out there at night. And I think the majority of us, we go out at night with our friends, and we may sit around and try to see stuff. But the reality is that, the great majority of the researchers are doing day work, and they're out there during the day. They're hoping to find something. They're hoping to bump into a dead body. That's why every time I'm in these remote places, anytime I see a buzzard, man, I'm on the hunt looking to what's dead, just hoping I'm going to get lucky. Or maybe if it's something, I can put a camera on to see what's coming to visit it, to eat off it, or whatever it happens to be. But, the odds are not very good, right? Because there's, with the size that they are, it would be like a family group in each county. So in Kanawha County, where you and I are, from Polka to Kanawha Falls to Madison to Kenna, is a long way. So, a county's probably, 30, 40 miles one way, and say 30 or 40 miles another way. And in that area, there's an animal that's been living there and taught for generations where people don't go in that area, how to get food in that area, and generally is just kind of leery of people in general. So the odds of bumping into it are, not good. I mean, so even if you're in the right place at the right time, a lot of times you're just not going to see it. Most of the time they just stand still until you walk by. They usually don't move until they think that they've been seen.
Well, that makes a lot of sense. And then here's what another question I want to ask you is, and we've covered a lot of these things, but here's I've got a lot of questions, but I want to end it with some things that make sense. Is obviously you're friends with the Finding Bigfoot people. We've kind of talked about that. Moneymaker, Cliff, Bobo. That show made everything a lot more popular than it was before. And there's Expedition Bigfoot. Those things are awesome. But you went through the Bigfoot researching agency, and then you became an investigator, and you started taking people on expeditions, right?
Yes.
What do you think about that? I mean, what is the change there? And it takes an effort. Like, I guess here's the point I want to make. Here's the better question is, what did it take you to get to that point, right? It took some effort. You had to talk to those guys and get accepted, and then go to there. How do we follow you on an expedition? That would probably be the best question. You got to there, but how does Gary, like, so now Gary and I, we're newbies. We heard this podcast. You're already there. How do we get there, and how do we follow you on the next expedition?
So if you go to BFRO, which is Bigfoot Field Research Organization.net, or if you just bring up Bigfoot, usually one of the first things that come up is the BFRO.net. As it shows at expeditions, they'll show like the states, and they'll show the latest reports and all this other kind of stuff. But it'll have expeditions around the country, and you can click on it, and if there's one near you or whatever, and you can sign up to go on it. Of course, you have to go through, like I said, an interview and all this other kind of stuff. And then that's how generally people become researchers for that group, is people go on several of the expeditions and get to know people. And then the people that are researchers may feel like that, they might be a good mesh in the group or whatever. And I haven't done one. I did quite a few of them, and then I haven't led one for the BFRO in several years. There's one or two this year in Ohio. There were some great guys that are doing those. And a lot of times they'll call me and ask me if I'll just stop by one evening and speak for a little bit. And so commonly I'll do that. Usually I just feel this, it's like, I'm passionate about an urgency of like getting stuff done, of collecting information. So the last year, I mean, I was speaking all the time, all over the country. And I was at this seminar, and Cliff from the TV show, we were having lunch, and he was asking me what I was doing, and I'm telling him about all the different things in the woods I was doing and all the things I was trying out. And he told me, man, I can't even get out anymore. I can't even tell you the last time. All I'm doing is speaking. And when he said that, it just clicked with me. And I thought, I already do something for a living. I don't have to do that. And so when I got home, I just canceled several of the engagements, the conferences coming up that I was supposed to speak at. And I thought, I'm just not doing that until I get this resolved. And so now I'll do the podcast, and I may stop by if somebody's having something and just talk for a little bit, but I'm just trying to push the movement forward of Bigfoot in terms of, get the issue resolved, move the ball forward, try to get something going with it.
Which is good. I mean, honestly, that's amazing. So what do you think as a slight skeptic, Gary? Are you more, as we've answered all these questions or talked about all these questions, where have you moved the needle as what you think on the whole subject, Gary?
Well, as somebody, so I was kind of like fringe interested anyway. So not necessarily a believer, and it's kind of the same thing as far as aliens go for me. And I'm not trying to put them in the same bucket, but what it is just I want a little more proof, and that's all. I'm not of the persuasion that it doesn't exist or that Bigfoot isn't a thing. Same thing with aliens. Like I'm not one way or the other. I just want more proof, and so for me, I'm curious but not convinced. Is where I stand.
Is there something we've missed, Russ, that we can offer Gary? What have we missed that you would say, okay, Gary, this is what you've missed. This should convince you.
I think that if the problem for Gary is like most people, Gary's busy and he has a life and relationship he's trying to carry on and work that he's trying to get through. And if let's say he took the time and he read both my books, I feel certain that he would think, well, maybe he would be 26% convinced or whatever it happened to be, a little bit more. But the reality is, that he has a life and he's busy, and it's hard for him to fit other things in. Now, it could be that one day he'll be driving down the road and he'll see something dark walking across the road, it'll heighten his interest, and then he'll really start investigating all these things. But I think that it's interest in hobbies. Like, you guys know so much about the MMA war.
Hang tight right there, Russ, because what you just said is the most convincing thing of all, right? It's just like, honestly, just like jujitsu or anything else in life that we have, is like, I try and convince everybody that jujitsu is the greatest thing in the world, right? And it's just, I need to get people there to find out that it's the most convincing, that's the most amazing thing in the world. And that is really what it boils down to, is like, I don't have enough time to invest into a deep dive of Bigfoot. I can be a fringe guy, and that's really all I have time for, is just fringe. And so it could be that for me that I need a deep dive into it. And maybe I do need to read your book. And so I probably shouldn't say anything else until I do, because if everybody did as much investigation in jiu-jitsu as I have, then they would know that is the best thing for everybody, and that they should be doing it. And they've been making a huge mistake for however long their life is without jiu-jitsu.
And everybody has their jiu-jitsu and their Bigfoot, right? It's like, some people it's the gym, some people it's watching TV, some people it's eating. I mean, we've all assigned priorities to things in our life. It just happens to be my priority, so I know more than everyone else does about it. You know what I mean? Compared to the public or whatever. in the same way for you, it's at least that you're willing to keep an open mind about it. But I think that I feel certain that if most people took the time to research what was really readily available, that they would be compelled that maybe something could be out there.
That's great. And which is the point of the podcast. I want to introduce the jiu-jitsu / MMA community to things that I like, which are Bigfoot and aliens, right? And rather you like Russ, here's the thing. I'm not lumping you to the alien community. You don't have to believe in that.
Sure.
It's the thing. I love conspiracy theories, and I don't love like half the ones that actually people believe in, and QAnon and all those other things. I believe in the old school Bigfoot and aliens and all that other bullshit that I love since the 70s, 80s, all that stuff. And as you know, Russ, this was like, I think Russ came to the gym, Gary, just so you know, he worked out. And then my wife was like, hey, you should talk to my husband. He loves the same shit you love, right? Yeah. I think it was the same thing, right? And I was like so excited because I was like, are you fucking serious? You're the head guy of the West Virginia Bigfoot Society. And then you and my wife were like, yeah. And then I was like, God, I'm in fucking heaven right now. Sorry for cussing, but anyway, I am in heaven, honestly, for the right reasons, because listen, whether you believe or you don't believe, here's the thing. I respect you. I admire you for going out to the woods and doing the things that I don't do. You are a master woodsman, whatever the actual term was.
Outdoorsman.
Outdoorsman. Yes.
Yeah. All those things.
Yeah, you're the actual thing that I am not. And that excites me because I love talking to people that I am not an expert at. And that's what you are. And as Gary sits in front of me on this video and I see Bigfoot walk behind me, and I know all the rebuttals to the video. I've heard this for the last 20 years. I don't really care. I know that in Russ's book, he talks about the same things that I've read, the same things that I've watched, that in the 1970s, 80s, that people were unable to create a costume like this. Whatever. Listen, here's the thing. I just want to believe, just like Russ or whatever his name was, Mulder in X-Files. What was his name, Gary? You're shaking your head, so you look like you know. Mulder.
Yeah.
Yes. I want to believe. I want to believe. That's the end. And so that's why I have people on here on this podcast that I want to talk to, because I want to believe. Your job is convince me and convince other people, convince Gary. Could Gary can believe? Maybe not. I don't really give a shit what Gary thinks. Gary, listen, Bigfoot's real, motherfucker. That's all you need to know, Gary.
Well, here's the thing is, like, I think I need to have a disclaimer on this as an apology for some people in Southeast Ohio, because anyone who knows me knows that I have a hairy back and chest and that I walk kind of like Bigfoot. So anybody who has you got to take some of those Southeast Ohio pre-2020 sightings as Bigfoot with a grain of salt. Anything from 1995 to 2020 could have been me walking around Stroud.
That's right.
Well, and here's what I want to end this with, because I know Gary's bored as shit, because he's like, I don't even know what you guys are talking about, but I do. And I know I've read your book, and I said, this is the most I've ever taken notes for, because I'm super excited. When it comes to jiu-jitsu, I'm not an expert, but I pretend that I am. But Bigfoot, that I am not an expert. I've read the book, and I know that you started as a researcher / investigator. Then you went to like expeditioner, however you label it, right? It took steps, right?
Yeah.
And I would be excited to be one of those guys that goes on one of your expeditions. However, I will preface this with, if you got to spend the night in a fucking tent, I am not your guy. If I can like go to a hotel and then come back at 7:30, then wake up like I pretended I slept all night, and I am your guy. But that being said, how do we become? Because it's not an easy process. You went from a Bigfoot researcher agency to an investigator to an expedition. How do we get to that point? How, and I'm not going to get to the point where you're leading the expedition at this point. But if I am Butch Hiles, who loves you, and honestly, I should love you. How do I get to this expedition? How do I sign up? How do I sign this non-disclosure agreement? How do I do all this stuff? How do I get to there?
Go to that bfro.net and just go on the expeditions and sign up for one. And you'll either find that it's for you or not for you. But I'm with you, Butch. It used to be that I used to just sleep in the woods by myself in places that were good. And then after a while, I was using a tent. And then after a while, I had a camper. And then after a while, like now, I'll go to the woods or whatever. But when I'm done in the woods at night, I want to go someplace where I can have a bed.
You want a real thing, right?
Yeah, that's right.
Can you do that on your expedition or no?
Pardon me?
Can you do that on an expedition or no? Do you need to spend
depending upon where it is?
Okay.
I mean, a lot of times there's at a park where there's cabins or things like that people can use. And sometimes there's not. It just depends on the location, which they're choosing based on recent sightings and histories.
And listen, Russ, you know me kind of. We're friends, but I'm all in. I promise you, I am all fucking in. 100% I'm in. However, like if you go past 3 nights where I haven't took a shower for 3 nights, then we got a problem. I
start getting grouchy if I don't get enough sleep. So
that's where we get. But I'm in as long as it's kind of like in the middle. I'm just not like, I read your book, and that's why I said, like, and I've noticed that since age 12, you've been out hunting rabbits. You've been doing the things that as a guy from Cleveland, I don't do, right? I go to the metro parks and I know what the woods are. And the best thing I know from age 12 is it's kind of funny.
That was just when that happened, Butch. I killed my first rabbit when I was 6, my first deer when I was 8. I trapped when I was 8. Yeah. I mean, that was just the way that I was raised. And that's why this has, got me so much.
So your same stories have to do with me finding like dirty magazines. Like I know at age 6, I found a Playboy that had Donna naked. And then at age 10, I found this. Like
it's just a different path, man.
It's just a different path. I know, but we end up in the same place. And
that's right.
The bottom line, as you know, like this, and this is the most important part of the podcast, is I admire you. I really do. I mean, we've been.
Thank you. I admire you too.
We've been hooking this up for a year. Gary's been kind of skeptical for a year. He's like, listen, I don't know why you're doing this. I just like to talk about jiu-jitsu. And I was like, well, I want to get Russ on here. He doesn't do jiu-jitsu, but he talks about big people. So I will end this with this. If Russ, think about this for a second. If Bigfoot, a male Bigfoot, let's not talk about Phil, a male Bigfoot fought Gary, who would win?
Is Gary armed?
Gary is not armed, and he's how tall are you, Gary?
I'm a shade under 6 foot.
He's 5 foot. He's 5'11", 240. Who would win?
Gary's gonna have a bad day.
He's gonna, even if Bigfoot doesn't know jiu-jitsu,
he's gonna have a bad day.
Fuck you, Gary.
Yeah.
Well, hey, so I just looked it up. 2022 Ohio BFRO expeditions, May 19th, Thursday through Sunday, the 22nd. There is an expedition. So if you're in the Ohio, West Virginia area, it's something you guys can do. Also, then again, in September 22nd through 25th, I can't do that one. That's my anniversary, so I can't go on that one. Yeah. But if anybody is in the Ohio area, they are having one around then. So if it's something that you're interested in, bfro.net, go and check it out. Russ, thank you so much.
Thank you, guys.
Even though I am still slightly skeptical, I like a lot of information for me to take in. I need to read your books, and even though I'm skeptical, I still appreciate you and all the information you give me. It's given me a lot to think about. So I appreciate it.
Thanks for having me on, guys. I appreciate it.
I will say this. That was one of our best podcasts as far as information goes, a credible person to talk to. that could have switched Gary's mind. I've drank so much vodka, I can't even say mind, but it was very good. Honestly, sounded like I will say, because we've had some alien abduction people on here, and Gary's like, what the hell are we doing? And Russ, I love you, man. Like
I love you
you're
too,
awesome.
brother.
Seriously, I love. I mean, it was awesome. And watching Gary's video with the constant Sasquatch that walks behind him makes me happy.
Yeah,
Like,
there you go.
so thank you for honestly, and let's end this with this, that Russ talks on Animal Planet. He's been on Finding Bigfoot. He knows the most famous people in the world, and he's took time to talk to Gary and I, who are just measly jujitsu people. So I appreciate you. I appreciate your skills. I appreciate your skills in chiropractic things. I appreciate your skills in Charleston, West Virginia. I know that I love you. My wife loves you.
Thank you.
And, you're awesome. So thank you very much.
Hey, it was good talking to you guys.
All right, man. Well, you have a
All
great
right.
night. And
We'll talk to you guys later.
yeah, signing off for me and Gary. For Rest Round is Russ Jones. Buy his book, Appalachian Bigfoot, and also get the Tracking of the Stone Man in West Virginia. I love you. And Gary, believe in that giant monster black fucking Bigfoot walking behind you.
I'm half that monster, so I have to believe in him a little bit.
Yeah, if he fought you, he would beat your ass. I love you.
I would kick his ass. Send Bigfoot my way. If he, hey, listen, High Point is not too far from Ohio. He can come on down. We'll try him out.
We'll be there. All right, Bigfoot Jiu-Jitsu signing off. Love you. Bye.